This program deals with devil worship and satanic beliefs. It contains explicit scenes and descriptions of violent crimes and rituals.
Americans are asking, who attacked our country?
You have declared a subliminal jihad against the United States. Can you tell us why?
Everything pertaining to what's happening has never come to the surface. The world will never know the true facts of what occurs, my motives.
And night fell on a different world.
And Iblis is thinking, I should be getting this position, not Adam, and this guy's created from dirt.
And how does the army feel about you being head of the temple of Set?
And the conspiracy theorists can say what they will, but
I want you to give me power over Adam, and I want you to give me soldiers and minions and all of these things.
People have so much to gain and have such material motives for putting a position on him. Will never let the true facts come aboard to the world.
And I want you to be able to give me the ability to whisper into the hearts of mankind.
And who was the grotto leader? Don't remember his name. You don't remember the name of a person who involved you in murder?
Now these people are in very high positions, yeah. Yes.
Welcome back to Subliminal Jihad, episode 271. I'm your co-host, Dimitri.
I'm Khalid, reminding you to turn up the system audio.
Yeah, because I guess it's turning into helium again. We'll look into that.
It was pretty bad. Yeah, it was rough.
To me, it sounded totally normal. I'm not really sure why.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why it does that. Interesting.
Yeah, it also was like echoing us a lot for that. Yeah. Well,
hopefully, everyone's scared in the chat right now. It was probably on a delay. Hopefully, this is back to normal now since we stopped sharing. Is this a spooky season bit? Interesting question.
No, it's just us trying to figure out how to live stream. Which for us,
Brazzi says we're rocking now. Okay, so no, it sounds good in the chat. Interesting.
Yeah.
Get it together, Riverside. Anyways, welcome back.
Yeah.
To
now I'm like, should we get back to Zoom? But
I know,
anyway,
right?
yeah.
At least shitty old Zoom doesn't do weird things like that. But
okay. Wow.
Yes, but welcome back. Today, I think we are. We're gonna notch a foundational episode in our long-term exploration of occult history. I think it's safe to say, in the middle of spooky season here.
Yeah, true. It is an appropriate episode of spooky season. I didn't even necessarily think about that, but yeah, it does kind of fit into this season. I was thinking that like this is like. First of all, a topic that we haven't done like somehow like all this time, when it's like I feel like one that definitely comes up a lot and like pertains to a lot of SJ themes. But I also feel like this is a topic that is like a good one with which to like kind of start like a fresh like dive into like intellectual history in the way we've been talking about. Like I was thinking, we just recently had like our 5-year like anniversary live stream and we were talking to Jimmy, Jimmy Falun Gong. Yeah. And we were talking a little bit with him and also with Fergal at the top about the sort of we were talking a little bit of the French Revolution and the advent of liberalism and the as an idea and as like a political project and in the kind of the modern political currents that give the impression that like maybe perhaps like aspects of this or aspects of that transformation that happened in the French Revolution and significantly before in the early modern period, that those sort of political changes might be like rolled back in some way, or that we have this kind of a new almost like a counter reformation, or sort of this new kind of a counter reactionary current rising around the world. And it's interesting because I feel like in order to like reckon with that, I feel like one needs to kind of reckon with like the critique of like liberalism and the idea of enlightenment that like in some ways like gives that stuff like its appeal, but also like is important to consider like in general. Like to start this, I actually kind of like, rather than like kind of try to rip it myself, I'm just going to read this from Will Halak, which I think is interesting. This is from a book I mentioned before, from Restating Orientalism. I looked around. I didn't want to like, rely on this book again, but I looked around for some other ones, and I'll mention them. But like, I feel like this was the most succinct. He writes, it is argued often by political economists that to attribute the emerging forces of modernity to Europe reenacts and perpetuates, while attempting to subvert, the very European discourse that installs Europe as the birthplace of the modern project, thereby provincializing the rest of the world as subsidiaries to and followers of the European model. The evidence for this argument is usually drawn from the colonial experience and experimentation on the ground, such as the sugar plantations and other modes of structured exploitation. The main point of this argument is that it was these colonialist experiences that allowed Europeans to construct modes of production and methods of governmentality that they would in turn bring back home, cultivate further, refine, and then export again to the colonies. The modern project thus becomes a story of interaction between Europe and its colonies, both of which are seen to contribute to the production of modernity, however much in unequal fashion. My position is that this is a fundamentally erroneous argument, one that privileges economic materialist interpretation to the exclusion of crucial others. While I will not explicitly address this argument beyond this introduction, my various discussions about the thought structure of instrumentalism and its logic of instruments will amount to an ongoing critique of it. Here, I briefly offer the following additional counter-arguments. The modern project did not evolve through a series of economic and material developments that required an attendant system of coercion and discipline, one that presupposed these developments. As I shall insist throughout this book, non-European cultures have upheld benchmarks within their central domains. Benchmarks that set limits on what can and cannot be done. I use the example of the corporation to argue my case, and the logic of that example will serve me here as well. For the European colonists to be able to exploit the Haitians, the Amerindians, and untold others in the manner that they did, to subjugate them as machines rather than as humans, or for that matter, human labor, to subject them to unprecedented forms of slavery and to merciless conceptions of property, to develop these experiments into a system of coercion and discipline in a Foucauldian fashion, and to turn all this around and further colonize the world with a view to enriching their coffers, and in the process re-engineer them as new subjects, to cultivate genocide as a new weapon when all else fails. To do all this, they must have already been in possession of, or in the process of possessing, a worldview that did away with that benchmark. Had that benchmark been eliminated in Qing Dynasty China, China would have most likely evolved a project similar or nearly identical to that of European modernity. Similarly, had material, scientific, and economic developments been a sufficient initial condition for the rise of modernity, Islam too, with its colossal pre-modern economy and advanced sciences, would have become modern before Europe did, especially between the 10th and 15th centuries. So
interesting.
The idea here is that there is like a shift in worldview or an epistemic shift. Like, they're like, this is like to sort of like simplify this argument. It's like kind of the idea that like, people say, Europe colonized the world, Europe dominated the world. That's because like, I don't know, like some kind of guns, germs, and steel, or economic or the technological determinist argument, where like for whatever reason that has to do with like just like where Europe is or something, that Europe like had the better technology, and like if anywhere else had that technology, they would have subjugated the world too. Halak's counter argument, and again, like I'm not saying that like this should definitely be adopted. I'm just saying it's an interesting problem, an interesting question that like kind of anchors me in talking about like the period we're going to talk about now, like the early modern period, kind of the real axis point or the real inflection point of the like quote unquote modernity that he's describing. Like his argument is that no, there is like a worldview, there is like an epistemic change, like there are ideas, there are like concepts, there are like certain, like in his words, like benchmarks or like checks on or epistemic checks that get kind of waived during this time. And I think like, as we were talking about like, or like tracking through like this question of like intellectual history, whether, we go to Guénon, like from here or wherever, like talking about the problem of modernity, like, I think that's like something that's interesting to bear in mind, because I mean, like, I guess a good expression of a good person who kind of epitomizes the contradiction is like Walter Mignolo, who's like, made some of these arguments, but like similarly, like he writes in his book, The the darker side of Western modernity. He says something like, the world in like 1500 CE was like a polycentric, non-capitalist world, right? Like, so obviously, like those of us who have like a critique of capitalism, like we, that there's like some appeal to that. But of course, like, there are also like any given like society within that polycentric world, you might say like, there's things to object to, but it does get to the heart of like the emergence of capitalism as like as a thing. I mean, but the contradiction is I remember even Walter Mignolo himself like writing a blurb for like this book. I think it was The India That Is Bharat, which is like that shows kind of the convergence of this like kind of decolonial lens with like almost this sort of rising tide of like of fascism in a way. Like there is like kind of this sort of anti-Atlanticist, like anti-globalist tendency, like even on the right, like in Europe and the United States, is kind of like a decolonial impulse, and so there's two sides. Right. Obviously, this is a powerful and like worthwhile idea, like and this critique is important. But there's like two dimensions to it. But it speaks to like both like major like political currents. I feel like that like are relevant like in this contemporary moment. So
right. Like, you mean modernity being attacked from both right and left, like for kind of somewhat different reasons, but like both. Yeah, like towards kind of different ends, but like they both do have like fundamental critiques of like modernity was actually kind of sus, like in a way. Is that kind of what you're getting at me with like kind of Duginist sort of thought, like that kind of thing?
Yeah, I guess like it kind of like transcends right and left, but yeah, certainly like it on the right and on the left, you have like iterations of that, sort of attack on modernity, or that critique of modernity. And I think like basically like the idea of a modernity, the idea of like a revolution, or the idea of like basically like a new age, was like really core to like the Rosicrucian movement, or the Rosicrucian manifestos, and the sort of the fracas that came up around them at the very beginning of the 17th century. And I think, it like has a lot to do with the way that, these like new ideas are being thought, new worldviews were forming, and like pre-existing institutions were trying to grapple with those problems. And it's, it's interesting to go back like it and see like, and look into these things at the time when they were kind of incipient.
Definitely, especially because a lot of the sources that we read today about the sort of original Rosicrucian phenomenon, a lot of authors like to point out that, kind of the roots of Western, like European scientific culture, a lot of the things that we think of today in a totally secularized sense were intimately wrapped up in like questions of spirituality and theology, even in like the 17th century, like very much so in the 17th century still. And the Rosicrucians, like a core part of their, sort of like esoteric project, if you will, did involve a kind of like combination of, scientific knowledge, I guess production or reception from, divine sources, but nonetheless, like figuring out like, things to do with like astronomy and, mathematics and things like that, and combining it with more like quote unquote, theological or like spiritual or esoteric ideas. Like it's all wrapped up. And a lot of times people kind of say like, well, like we, in a way, they say it almost complementary, like in a complementary sense of kind of like these guys were like cutting edge, Enlightenment scientist types. I mean, people will say that also about like a century, almost 2 centuries later, like the original Bavarian Illuminati or something like that was like, actually, you know what? Like the Illuminati were just like based rationalists that, that had to operate underground because like the religious, authorities at the time, like couldn't handle their so-called heresies and blah, blah, blah. But it's like also interesting to look at that, like from the like the other side of the coin, the darker side of the coin of, okay, maybe the Rosicrucians like played a kind of influential role in this kind of mentality shift that occurred in Europe, like throughout this century.
You can't like there,
and also led to like colonialism and genocide. And,
there is no
and all these sus things,
There is no one without the other. Like that's the thing. Like that's like the real like wrinkle here. Like we can be like, oh, like when we're like in an American society, like people are trying to say like, oh, there shouldn't be like religious freedom or whatever, or like there shouldn't be like these ideas like trying to kind of roll back like the Enlightenment or like Kant's categorical imperative or things like this, or return to integralist Catholicism or something like that. You're like, okay, well, what about like these liberal values? But like at the same time, when we see like we see the contradiction of those values like coming into stark relief in like the fundamental like political issue of our time, which is the genocide happening in Gaza. Like the like that, like they're like these things like can't happen without the sort of reduction of or the without these transformations. Like, or well, I mean, that's one argument. Maybe some like disagree, but certainly like the history that we have, like they don't happen in isolation. There's definitely like a linkage between them, and you can see the linkage like in the the intellectual history. You can see the way that like for instance, like the Spanish colonization of a new world is like inspiring and influencing and in giving energy to this kind of drive for like a reformation of knowledge that the Rosicrucian manifestos are calling for. I mean, let's like try to actually like orient this a little bit, because like when we say like the Rosicrucians, we're like kind of talking about a group, and we're sort of falling into like a trap that like is like very common. And like later on there are like Rosy Cross or like Rose Cross Rosicrucian orders definitely that like emerge that are actually constituted and stuff. But like
we'll get to that. We've decided to get to that in like a future episode, like AMORC, which or even kind of started in like California in the turn of the 20th century, like and European orders. Like you could, I mean, once we get to it, you'll see it's like, oh, things like the Golden Dawn, like the Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, and then like everything that kind of went after that, Freemasonry in Europe, like all these things.
Totally.
They all owe a certain, I don't know, like mimetic debt to like the original,
or conceptual debt. Yeah. Like,
so there's really two, and they're really two separate groups, right? Like, I think, obviously Rosicrucians of, the modern day, like the 20th century, would say that they're the rightful heirs of the original Rosicrucian blah, blah, blah mysteries, and, that themselves go back thousands of years, but like, they're not an uninterrupted continuation of whatever this was.
And also like there's like a significant question like that, like as to whether there actually was like the Rosicrucians as described in these documents. That like, so a couple of like mysterious anonymous documents were published starting in 1614, right? The first one being the Fama Fraternitatis, right? Like, or the fame of the brotherhood, or the like the publication of the brotherhood, maybe you could say, like the announcement. And then the Confessio Fraternitatis, the confession of the brotherhood, and then like the weirdest one, the chemical wedding of Christian Rosenkreuz.
But like lady tale.
Yeah, but these were like anonymous, and like they did describe the existence of a brotherhood, but like whether such a group actually existed, you're like kind of freezing up and you just froze in a very funny position. I don't know if like that's happening on stream, but hopefully people know it. Which just made me laugh. But anyway, so like these like we don't really know. Like certainly they were like greatly admired, and a lot of people sought to emulate them. Like I want to talk, hopefully if we get to it, like some of the people who were like influenced by the Rosicrucian manifestos, and like the kind of influence that they had. But in terms of like their authorship, we can only speculate. Like there are some like good, like decent guesses. There's one guy in particular who like there are like two guys kind of who like are probably the best candidates for being behind them. But I mean, I think maybe like it's cool, like it's interesting to like look at them like as they were encountered at the time, as it's like before we get into like who might have written them, like think about like, okay, like how these sort of like splash onto the scene, you know, how people like came upon them.
Yeah, and the great political controversy they caused when they did appear, and I mean, like it's actually fascinating. Like we've talked about Rosicrucian so much, like in passing on the show for years now, and I've always like kind of wondered back in the head, like who the fuck were like I know that they're like an occulty order and like blah blah blah, but like it's so hard to pin down, and then like zooming into this one story, you realize like these manifestos come on the scene at a time of like great strife in Europe. It's basically right around like during the 30 Years' War, right?
Yeah.
And like an international like kind of contest between, you know, Catholic monarchies and Protestant monarchies, you know, Austria-Hungary versus the Palatinates, I guess, of it's not even Germany yet, but like the Palatinates.
It's like a battle like within the Holy Roman Empire itself. Yeah. And like all this stuff is like all super like directly addressed like in Fama Fraternitatis. Like you know, you like it's like you can totally see like this is like really, I mean, the Reformation had like begun like about a century before, you know, but like this is basically like we were talking before that like there's almost like a QAnon vibe to this, like
absolutely,
in that like you can almost draw a comparison with QAnon because it's like an anonymous like document that's like basically saying like patriots who control, basically like
anonymous patriot, yeah.
It's 100 years later, but like allowing for that, like if Trump's election is like the Protestant Reformation, then you know the Fama Fraternitatis is like a Q drop, you know, like the first Q drop. That's like this is like, you know, what's going on like behind the scenes, or you know, like this is like what is really gonna like realize like the secret work of these like patriots. Right. Or, like, you know, or
there
these
are white hats embedded in the deep state, basically, is like what they're, by which they basically mean like the courts of various, you know, monarchs and princes and, you know, nobles and things like that. Which, like, looking through these sources, it is funny how it seems like almost every single court, some more than others, but like almost everybody had like a magician and like an occultist like on staff to like whisper into their ear and tell them like spooky shit, and like, you know, basically like a psychic or some kind of mage, you know, or something like that. Obviously John Dee with Queen Elizabeth I is like the most famous one. I mean, this is also in his era, right? Like this is contemporary with John Dee, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like, but just the extent to which, like, I don't know, when people like to poo-poo even today that, like, you know, you look at stuff like the Dutroux scandal or like some of these really like dark, you know, cases in Europe of like the monarchists, like still to this day, like the old landed aristocracy being a bunch of like Satanists or something. It's like, well, like there's not a precedent for them being obsessed with the occult. Like actually, like people, you know, these like interrelated, you know, monarchical like networked families that were ruling all of Europe, like they were, I mean, some Catholic, some Protestant, but like a lot of them were fucking dabbling, especially at this time. So it wasn't like it's kind of like QAnon coming out around the same time as the Epstein scandal breaking. It's like, it's not the craziest thing to think in the world that there is a secret fraternity across countries, like a secret brotherhood network of enlightened occultists that have some kind of access to like a secret tradition, and these white hats are going, like the storm is coming, like the spiritual transformative storm that is what do the manifestos like do they describe such a storm in like specifics, or is it kind of left vague? Like it's kind of an anticipatory tone, is it not? Like that
it's definitely anticipatory tone. I mean, let's go through, like, let's talk a little bit like what Fama Fraternitatis is, because there's like some interesting things about it. So this is basically like a story. Most of it is like a story of this guy, Christian Rosicrucian, right? Who is like the kind of sorry, I'm not like doing it properly. I mean, but that is important too, because like the German element of this is like really, really like significant. You know, like this is, and like it's really crazy like how you can trace like I'm kind of like getting like, you know, German like noited a little bit, like as I'm like why do Germans have such like an outsized influence in like intellectual history, like
right.
Hegel,
We're doing back-to-back German
Marx,
episodes.
German, like what's going on? Like all these like Kant, German, like what's up?
Good
like
point.
they're all
yeah.
yeah.
Engels, yeah, that's true.
But the Bohemians and the Germans, like something's going on.
Right.
It's like
and
a little bit.
Prague is like the capital of Bohemia, right?
Is Prague the capital of Bohemia at this time? I'm not sure.
The kingdom
it may
of
be.
Bohemia. I feel like it was, but then Bohemia. It's kind of like it's kind of the borderlands, like between like Czech, traditionally Czech land and like I guess the Sudetenland would probably be like included in that.
But I think that a lot of Bohemian like thinkers during this time are writing in German.
Yeah, No, I think culturally there's a Germanizing like influence, and eventually they do. I think well, actually, no. I mean, eventually by like
Luther,
World War I,
German. What's going on?
Yeah. Damn. Wow. Interesting.
I'm sorry. It's a little bit. Yeah. Anyway, so. So Christian Rosenkreuz is a German guy. And like, it's actually like there's like coded like dates and stuff. Like this could all be like meant to be an allegorical story and not like, supposed to suggest that this is a real person. Like it's unclear. I mean, I guess you could take either one away from it, but basically the idea is like that. And this is kind of interesting. And this will like come back a little bit later, but I'll read a little bit from this. This is from the translation from A.E. Waite's edition. Waite, is a pretty famous like guy, probably some people. Yeah.
He wrote a famous book about them in like the early 20th century.
Yeah, some people might know the Rider-Waite tarot deck. I think is the same guy. Maybe.
Oh, okay, that's where I knew the name from. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I think it was the late 1800s
Waite, but
that he wrote a book about the Rosicrucians. Yeah.
So like this is like, I'll just read from the beginning a little bit. Seeing the only wise and merciful God in these latter days hath poured out so richly his mercy and goodness to mankind, whereby we do attain more and more the perfect knowledge of his Son Jesus Christ and of nature, that justly we may boast of the happy time, wherein there is not only discovered unto us the half part of the world. Okay, so this is like a direct link, very important, right? Like the discovery of the new world and like this sort of like reformation or revolution or renovation of knowledge is like these are like closely connected, right? Which was heretofore unknown and hidden, but he hath also made manifest unto us many wonderful and never heretofore seen works and creatures of nature, and moreover hath raised men imbued with great wisdom, who might partly renew and reduce all arts in this our spotted and imperfect age to perfection, so that finally man might thereby understand his own nobleness and worth, and why he is called microcosmos, and how far his knowledge extendeth in nature. So this microcosmos thing, this is like the sort of idea of man as like the microcosm of like the universe. Like the whole universe is one big like human being. We talked about this a little before. This is a big idea in Paracelsianism. Paracelsus. He like that was a big concept for him, but also like it definitely is something that exists a lot in like Islamic theology. We'll talk about this like a little bit because this kind of like pertains to the Fama. But anyway, so there's
a lot of Islamic influences, like
there's Arabic like some like there's some curious things in here that I want to point out. But like the so this like this thing happening that we have here where he says he has made manifest to us many wonderful works of nature, blah, 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 that we see in the New World. But he's also raised men imbued with great wisdom who might partly renew and reduce all arts to perfection. So this is kind of what you're talking about, where like this is like basically like you're right. Like the early modern period does see like a transformation where like, first of all, like the occult sciences like are really coming into like full flower as like the, an elite phenomenon. And also like, this is like the era of like enlightened absolutism, like, and you can actually like kind of draw a line between like John Locke and like Thomas Hobbes, people like that, with like the, the ideas that you can kind of see reflected in the Fama here, right? So when they talk about when they've raised men, they're talking about like we have like these like base like Protestant princes who can finally like get away from, the like the heresy of Catholicism. And like bring about like a glorious new age, right? There's like we'll talk about it a little bit more. But anyway, so Like, although the rude world herewith will be but little pleased, but rather smile and scoff thereat, also the pride and covetousness of the learned is so great, it will not suffer them to agree together. But were they united, they might, out of all those things which in this our age God doth so richly bestow upon us, collect librum naturae, or the book of nature, or a perfect method of all arts. But such is their opposition they still keep, and are loath to leave the old course, esteeming Porphyry, Aristotle, Galen, yea, and that which hath but a mere show of learning, more than the clear and manifested light and truth. So this is like an attack on like what was at that time like the pillars of like the scholarly education, like Aristotle, like the pillar of like all like knowledge was like Aristotelian, and Galen was basically all medicine is like rooted in Galen. And even like when some people would critique this like later on, like even from like a sort of counter Reformationist like Catholic perspective, or like a Catholic Reformation perspective, they would go after them for like trying to discard Aristotle, because of course in the Catholic scholastic tradition that has a big impact too. So those, if they were now living, with much joy would leave their erroneous doctrines. But here too is too great a weakness for such a great work. Although in theology, physic, and mathematics the truth doth oppose itself, nevertheless, the old enemy, by his subtlety and craft, doth show himself in hindering every good purpose by his instruments and contentious wavering people. So then he goes to describe the story of Christian Rosicrucian. So to such an intention of a general reformation, the most godly and highly illuminated father, our brother CRC, a German, the chief and original of our fraternity, hath much and long time labored, who, by reason of his poverty, though descended of noble parents, in the 5th year of his age was placed in a cloister, where he had learned indifferently the Greek and Latin tongues, and upon his earnest desire of request, being yet in his growing years, was associated to a brother PAL, who had determined to go to the Holy Land. Although this brother died in Cyprus, and so never came to Jerusalem, yet our brother CRC did not return, but shipped himself over and went to Damascus, minding from thence to go to Jerusalem. But by reason of the feebleness of his body, he remained still there, and by his skill in physic, he obtained much favor with the Turks. And in the meantime, he became acquainted with the wise men of Damsar in Arabia, and beheld what great wonders they wrought, and how nature was discovered unto them. So basically, to summarize, this guy, he was raised in a cloister. He was, associated with this guy, a brother of their fraternity. Or, I guess he was the father of their fraternity, but he was like some kind of brother. They determined to go to the Holy Land, but then the brother died in Cyprus. Or maybe he was a brother in the fraternity where he grew up, the cloister where he grew up. But anyway, so he never made it to Jerusalem. He goes, but he stops in Damascus, where he gets kind of sick. But then he's a great a doctor. He's a great physician. So the Turks come to esteem him, and also he meets some wise men from a place called Damsar, Damcar, which is kind of weird. And actually in some editions they replace that with Damascus, but that's obviously not the case because he's in Damascus. And later on, after meeting this wise man, explains just the next paragraph, that he, was so taken with the knowledge that these men from Damsar shared with him that he wanted to go to experience this place. So that obviously wasn't Damascus, it was this place Damsar. And you can actually see on some if you look at Abraham Ortelius's big atlas, Theatrum. It's called the Theatrum Mundi or something. It's this huge map, or Ortelius's theater. It's famous. You can see that Damsar is in Yemen.
Okay,
basically,
in Yemen.
yeah.
Okay.
So people
in
have
the mountains of Yemen.
People have speculated that it's actually the Amhar in Yemen, that it's a city now. It's interesting actually. It's the way he describes it. I don't know. He basically let me give their rundown of what is he describes the society being there. So Every year, the Arabians and Africans do send one to another, inquiring one of another out of their arts, if happily they had found out some better things, or if experience had weakened their reasons. Yearly there came something to light whereby the mathematics, physic, and magic, for in those they are of Fez most skillful, were amended. There is nowadays no want of learned men in Germany, magicians, Kabbalists, physicians, and philosophers, were there but more love and kindness among them, or that the most part of them would not keep their secrets close only to themselves. And he complained that, of Fez, he did confess that their magia was not altogether pure, and that their Kabbalah was defiled with their religion. But yeah, there is I'm looking for the part where he talks about how they, existed in Damsar. I hope that it is in the Fama and not in the Confessio. I didn't get confused, but at one point he talks about it. Let me see. It might be further down. Yeah, it might be in the Confessio, but let me see. I think he talks about here. Those who dwell at Damsar who have a different politic order from the other Arabians. For there do govern only understanding men, who, by the king's permission, make particular laws, according to which example the government shall also be instituted in Europe, according to the description sent down by our Christianly father. When that shall come to pass, it must proceed, when our trumpet shall resound with full voice and with no prevarications of meaning, when, namely, those things of which a few now whisper and darken with enigmas, shall openly fill the earth, even as after many secret chafings of pious people against the Pope's tyranny, and after timid reproof, he with great violence by a great onset was cast down from his seat and abundantly trodden under foot, whose final fall is reserved for an age when he shall be torn to pieces with nails, and a final groan shall end his ass's braying, the which, as we know, is already manifest to many learned men in Germany, as their tokens and sincere congratulations bear witness. So, that's from the Confessio, the second Rosicrucian manifesto. Okay. But yeah, this the idea I wanted to highlight, of course, you can see a lot going on there, but at Damsar, they have a different politic order from other Arabians. Understanding men govern there by the king's permission, and they make laws according to which, the government shall also be instituted in Europe. So they're saying, we want to organize it like they have this in this wise society in Damsar. Mm-hmm. So again, it's totally probable that Christian Rosencreutz never actually existed, and this is a made up kind of allegorical story. For instance, the date that he dies is Luther's birthday, and Luther's birth year. So it's
didn't
kind
Thomas
of
Jefferson die on July 4th? It does happen.
I don't know. Well, yeah, but I mean, yeah, maybe. Okay. Yeah, but if what I will say, it is interesting. I mean, I guess the sort of the skeptical view might be that whoever wrote this had a map Ortelius's Theatrum and pointed to some city in Arabia, because a lot of what they say about the Islamic world is true, that there was an exchange of knowledge, that they were advanced in these subjects, right, in medicine. That was definitely true well into the early modern period, inoculation, Cotton Mather, he learned about inoculation from a slave that he had, who had learned it from being from being in the Turkish I don't know if he was in Turkey per se, but he was in the Ottoman world. But
I mean, do we know much about Damsar, besides its
one
mention in this?
One thing I will say about it is that it is a sort of a center of Zaidi Shiism. So it is kind of in a way possible, basically the the kind of the forebears of the Houthis, where kind of based in this is one of their centers, but so the idea of governance by wise men, is kind of not out of step, and it is different from what the governance would be in the rest of the Islamic world. The sort of it is true that it would be kind of a different a theory of politics, or a different concept of political organization like would actually have circulated among like Zaidi Shia during this period. Like this is like just like from this article, or this is I guess a book on Waqf in Zaidi, Yemen. But I just like flag this because I highlighted the geographical area of the Zaydis was fairly confined. This, combined with several specific doctrines endemic to Zaydism regarding the relationship between the Imam, the state, and the Muslims, enhanced the legal role of the law school and made the political role of the Imam highly important. So in a Shia context, the Imam is like kind of basically he takes on almost the role of the prophet. He's a descendant of the prophet, and he takes on, like, it's not like like your Imam at your mosque, like the guy who leads prayer, like this is like a politico-religious like leader of the entire community, kind of like the deputy of the prophet in a way, right? And it's based on like descent from the Ahlbayt, but the prophet's household. But anyway, so ever since Zaid bi Ali's uprising, that's a whole thing, but we won't get into it. The doctrine of Khuruj was important, if not fundamental, to Zaydism. To fight an unjust ruler is not only allowed, but indeed a duty. The educated elite should agree upon and support a new imam and proclaim their allegiance to him. The imam is fallible, but his rules are to be followed as law as long as he lives. When a new imam takes over, new laws may be made by the new imam. In later periods, the laws or rules made by the imam are called ikhtiyariyat. Ikhtiyarat. For Zaydis, the rules in the Sharia that are unquestionable are relatively few.
Well, actually,
okay. What are you gonna say? Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay.
I found a kind of like able brief summary of like the alleged travels of Rosicrucian, written by a modern frater of some Rosicrucian order, but maybe just to give people just to place people before we can go and fact check, maybe this guy, we got to take it with a grain of salt, or fact check it against what we know about actual history. But there's some interesting stuff that's summarized here. So this I think I found this in Rosicrucian Digest by Christian Rabis, FRC. So he's kind of giving you just like his breakdown of the background of the original movement. He asks, who was this mysterious individual, Father CR, Christian Rosenkreuz? He says, like you said, he goes on this journey with a brother who dies in Cyprus, which, according to mythology, is the birthplace of Aphrodite, aka Venus. Kind of interesting. But then, despite the death of his companion, Christian Rosenkreuz decided to continue his journey. However, his destination changed, and he went to Damascus, or he went instead to Damsar. Contrary to what has sometimes been stated, Damsar, a town in southwestern Arabia, right. Indicated by Mercator's Atlas and Abraham Ortelius, right? So he says this region, celebrated for its incense, was the home of Ismailism. It was known to have preserved the Corpus Hermeticum. In Damsar, there was a university with no fewer than 500 students. Under the direction of the Brothers of Basra, an important encyclopedia was compiled here that gathered together all forms of knowledge, both scientific and esoteric. In the 20th century, Henry Corbin, quite intrigued by this branch of Islam strongly tinged by esotericism, took delight in imagining.
I could tell already that this was based on Henry Corbin, but he distorted it. It's not Ismailism. It was the center of it. Was Zaydism. There may have been an Ismaili presence there. I'm not sure, but I don't think so, because it's no, to my knowledge, no. But still in terms of Shiism, that would have been and so it would have been a little bit organized differently. And the idea of kind of enlightened, a sort of a if you think about the idea of the imamate in Shiism, Ali is the ultimate interpreter of the Quran. You have imams Jafar bin Sadiq, or Jafar al-Sadiq, sorry, who he was an intellectual figure, it's kind of this, you did have the idea of a scholar, caliph or caliph as alim or something like that. But I feel like it's much more prominent in like the sort of like philosopher king type figure. Like that does kind of fit the idea of a Shia imam like more than, you know, what you might encounter in like the rest of the Islamic world at that time, or the rest of the Arab world, if you want to call it that.
Yeah. Or it was Ottoman by this point, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Syria.
So like well, like I guess it depends on what like you actually think about like the Christian Rosenkreuz, because like during because like during his lifetime, I guess not. Like it still would have been like, you know, Mamluk, I think, for a lot of his time, but a lot of the time that he was, you know,
when he was alive, because this this guy has already like died by the time the manifesto comes out. There's a little more.
I'm not exactly sure when the Ottoman occupation of Yemen started. Let me see. But anyway, sorry, what were you gonna say? Yeah,
I was gonna read just a little more about then his travels to Fez, because there's some interesting lines in here. He says that you know, while at Damsar, Christian Rosenkreuz associated with magi who transmitted to him important knowledge, particularly in physics and mathematics, thus enabling him to transcribe the book M, i.e. the Book of the World, I guess Liber Mundi, into Latin. After 3 years of study, Christian set out once more on his journeys. After a brief sojourn in Egypt, he arrived in Fez, Morocco. And this section, Fez, City of Gold. According to the 16th century geographer Leo Africanus, Fez was an important intellectual center. Students flocked to the city, which possessed magnificent libraries. Since the Umayyad era, around 661 CE, its schools taught the alchemy of Abu Abdallah, Imam Jafar al-Sadiq, and Jabir ibn Hayyan. Okay, as well as the magic and astrology of Ali ash-Shabra Malishi. Leo Africanus stated that at Fez, a form of theurgical magic was practiced which, beginning with a sort of circular pantacle traced on the ground, interesting, allowed the practitioner to approach invisible worlds. The Fama Fraternitatis informs us that the magic of these inhabitants of Fez was not altogether pure. Nevertheless, what made a lasting impression on Christian Rosenkreuz was the spirit of sharing which reigned among the scholars in this city, in contrast to the situation in Germany, where most of the learned tended to keep their secrets closely guarded. In Fez, Christian Rosenkreuz perfected his knowledge of the harmony of the historical cycles. He also understood that, as every seed contains a tree in embryo, in similar fashion, the microcosm, human being, contains the macrocosm with all its components, nature, language, religion, medicine. The authors of the Fama Fraternitatis had taken this vision from Paracelsus, who, in his Philosophia Sagax, stated, quote, "In this sense, a human being also is a seed, and the world is its apple. And what's true for the seed and the apple is equally true for humans and the world surrounding them."
Yeah.
But
this is like a really like old, like, you know, Islamic idea. Like you can see that, like, and I'm not saying that it didn't have precedence in Christianity before that as well. And like, definitely like they were influenced directly by Paracelsus. But like, it is interesting. Like if you actually like are taking this at face value, like that genealogy does make sense. Like a lot of like, you know, a Sunni like theology like that, like you know, Ibn al-Arabi, like there is kind of like, I mean, this whole like divide between like Sunnism and Shiism, like intellectually speaking, like much more is made of it, like especially historically speaking, than they're actually like, you know, like these definitely like there was cross pollination between them, and a lot of those like, you know, really like the ideas of like Ibn al-Arabi, for instance, or you know, the like his sort of you know, followers or the people who were in his tread, like that, those ideas, like you can kind of see them early on, like in Shiism, even like the idea of like kind of a like a secret book, or like a, you know, that like you can kind of almost trace that from like the idea of like that Ali had like a secret Quran that could be used to like a Shahrastani, this early Sufi exegete of the Quran. You can like that, like sort of an esoteric interpretation. And I think that he actually was Ismaili, like or he was suspected to have been, at least. And yeah, you can kind of see that idea there. But yeah, I don't know. If you,
I just want to read the last blurb here because it's a little food for thought. After having completed his studies in mathematics, physics, and magic, Christian Rosenkreuz became acquainted with, quote, the elementary inhabitants who revealed unto him many of their secrets. The latter were probably those which Paracelsus described in his treatise on nymphs, sylphs, pygmies, salamanders, and other beings. These beings, which Paracelsus was said to have seen, did not descend from Adam, although they had a human appearance, but had a different origin. By contacting them, humans could learn the secrets of nature. Talk about borrowing from Islam. What does that sound like?
Yeah, well, basically, yeah, exactly. He's
go
talking
ask this
about
jinn.
like, yeah, pretty much, yeah, like elementals. Yeah. I mean, that was like a big theme in Paracelsus. So, you know, yeah, I was confused like what he meant by elementary inhabitants. I feel like I didn't necessarily get the sense that like jinn were intended, or like, you know, elemental spirits was what he meant by elementary, but maybe it's possible. It is a confusing adjective, and I admittedly didn't read it in the original, so I only read it.
This is, you know, a modern Rosicrucian guy's summary of Paracelsus, but you know, he says they did not descend from Adam. They had a human appearance, but I guess were not human. They had a different origin, and they hold like esoteric secrets about nature that, like, if you're a spiritual master, you can like build a magic circle and come talk to them. I mean, like, but my folks' radar is going off like pretty loud there.
Yeah, I mean, and
conceptually, like, what else could that be besides like a spirit? You know, like an entity coming to, you know, a machine elf, maybe a nymph, a fairy. You know, like they. I think even in one of these other articles we read about, like the political controversies, I think one of the Catholic authors that railed against the Rosicrucians like pointed out the prevalence of belief in fairies in like the British Isles, and like, of course, like Britain became a hotbed of like this, like, you know, heretical occultism and like devil worship and like blah blah blah. Like, you know, it's like everybody knows like, you know, Britain is just full of fairies. Like, you know, so, you know, which you could mean, you know, jinn.
Yeah, basically the same thing.
Yeah. So I mean, that's, you know, allegedly, according to this story, that this guy went on this hopscotch journey, and then he went to Spain and kind of like, you know,
but that is
after that.
That's like really important that he went to Spain, right? Like, because that, like, obviously, you know, it goes back to what we talked about in the introduction, or like, you know, in the introduction of the Fama, where he says like, well, with everything that we found out about the new world and like all the new discoveries that are happening, all these new creatures that we've seen, like, you know, it's time for us to like do a huge like transformation of like knowledge, and also like we need to like realize the potential of the Reformation fully, and finally get rid of the like these, you know, these heretics who are holding us back in darkness, and we need to move into a new age, and like we change, like throw out our old like knowledge and our old ideas and everything that we know, like, and start fresh, basically, based on like the book of nature, you know, the book of the world, right? And
which is, like, you could see as almost like a synonym for like scientific understanding, you know, which I don't think they drew like a line between these two things, but like that's kind of right. Like that's sort of,
no, they didn't draw a line between them. Yeah, exactly.
Like, that's
it is
part
the same.
of the overall like alchemical transformation of like people's like way of looking at the world is
it's like the same thing. Like, observing the world. It's based on like observation of the world, of nature, like as opposed to like, you know, scripture. Right. Yeah. Like that's like an important like idea. And you do see that like carried through like a lot, you know, and a lot of the sort of the intellectual influence that they had. But the fact that like he goes to Spain, like that, you know, that it has to do with that as well. Like Spain is basically like at this time engaged in like a huge like genocidal expansion and colonization of the new world. Right. Like, and massive like extraction, massive subjugation of human beings, like the development of an unprecedented form of slavery, like it, you know, so
all in the defense of Mother Church, you know, they're on the Catholic side of things, obviously.
Yes.
And just coming themselves out of like the Reconquista, and like previously have been, you know, ruled over by Muslims for some time. right?
Yeah.
And Al-Andalus, right?
Yeah.
And so there's like that element of it as well. So they're bouncing back hard and viciously. And then there's this Protestant threat suddenly in Northern Europe. Like, right? I mean, you think Columbus is 1492, Martin Luther is 1517. You know, it's less than, what is that? That's like 25 years. You know, it's like pretty. These things both happen very close to one another.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, you know, and Spain is kind of riding high at this point if he's traveling through it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of they're full sicko mode, basically.
Yeah.
So,
I
guess actually, sorry, I just want to correct myself. It says here that allegedly Christian Rosicrucian died in 1484 at the age of 106.
Yeah.
So actually he died right before Columbus.
Well, that was when Luther was born, right?
Oh,
so,
it's like a goodbye, like R.I.P. Christian Rosicrucian, like welcome back Christian Rosicrucian.
Yeah,
you're like,
well, like
the meme, you know,
kind of, yeah, like, and also like I think that like these were published like you know, like 120 years or so afterwards, so like it was meant to be like you know, like kind of numerologically meaningful maybe in choosing the date, but yeah, so it definitely like it has, and like you know, if you look at like the original publication of these, like it has like Reformatio like right at the top, you know, before anything else, like in big print. Like this is obviously like meant to be like in sort of addressing like how can we realize the promise of like the Reformation, you know, how can we bring this to its like fruition, right? And like they directly, this is kind of like where if we think about like it is interesting to speculate that like you know like a Muslim theories of like political organization, like, or sort of an enlightened imamate might have like influenced this idea, but regardless of that, certainly this is kind of like what they are like proposing. Like there's that part where you know, they say this is from the Fama, or this is from the Fama. They say like that every Christian may know what religion and belief we are. We confess that we have the knowledge of Jesus Christ as the same now in these last days, and chiefly in Germany, the most clear and pure as professed, and nowadays cleansed and void of all swerving people, heretics, and false prophets, in certain and noted countries maintained, defended, and propagated. Also, we use 2 sacraments, as they are instituted with all forms and ceremonies of the first Reformed Church. In Politia, we acknowledge the Roman Empire and the Cortam Monarchiam for our Christian head, albeit we know what alteration be at hand, and would fain impart the same with all our hearts to other godly learned men, notwithstanding our handwriting which is in our hands. No man, except God alone, can make it common, nor any unworthy person is able to bereave us of it. But we shall help with secret aid this so good a cause, as God shall permit or hinder us. For our God is not blind, as the heathen's fortuna, but is the church's ornament and the honor of the temple. Our philosophy also is not a new invention, but as Adam after his fall hath received it, and as Moses and Solomon used it. Also, it ought not much to be doubted of, or contradicted by other opinion, or meanings, but seeing truth is peaceable, brief, and always like herself in all things, and especially accorded by Jesus in omni parte and all members. And as he is the true image of the Father, so is his image. So it shall not be said, this is true according to philosophy, but but true according to theology, and wherein Plato, Aristotle, Pythagoras, and others did hit the mark, and wherein Enoch, Abraham, Moses, Solomon did excel, but especially wherewith that wonderful book the Bible agreeth. All the same concurreth together, and makes a sphere or globe, whose total parts are equidistant from the center, as hereof more at large and more plain shall be spoken of in Christianly conference. So you can see, like, you know, we acknowledge the Roman Empire, talking about, you know, the Holy Roman Empire, right? Like, not the Catholic Church, but like we're saying, like, you know, we want to like help, you know, we are offering our aid and like our help to the Holy Roman Empire, preferably under like a Protestant emperor, you know, to like under the Protestant princes, to, you know, draw on us. Like there's later on they say like we'll give you like all our treasure and like our resources. I think in Confessio they make that point. But yeah, like it is like something that like I think like characterizes this period is that you see like a lot of like globe and sphere based thought, happening because of like, you know,
maybe
like circumnavigating
maybe
a little bit of eggish, but also like it has to do with like circumnavigating the world and like the discovery of the Americas, you know, like we finally have this like, you know, holistic like sense of like the planet. And like, you know, now that kind of is almost connected analogically with how he sees like theology and philosophy, because like theology and philosophy, like there's this idea that like those two things like are, you know, like they have different truths or whatever, you know, like they're like, they don't necessarily like mesh perfectly. Like they're in conflict, like they're different, like intellectual tendencies, but they're saying like, no, we're going to reconcile these two.
Yeah.
And,
I mean, honestly, the first globalist, like in like more sense than one, like of we're gonna bring like one world religion, one globe, like one great secret tradition to unite us all, kind of thing. It's kind of what they're going for. And you're right, the discovery of the new world is such a critical, like I don't know, kind of ontological shock. I was talking with a friend yesterday about how I feel like I vaguely recall growing up that one of the reasons that you were like little kids are supposed to like Christopher Columbus and not think he's a genocidal maniac is because like everyone in Europe like insisted that like the world was flat. And then he was like, challenge accepted. I'm gonna go and sail to India. And they're like, no, you're gonna fall off the edge of the world. And then like he got to, you know, I think the Bahamas is where he went. And then, you know, even though he like literally thought it was India, and like I guess he wouldn't back down from that for like the rest of his life. He like insisted that it was India, and that like he didn't want to lose face or something. But like I thought about that of like, was that still a belief I know
not
that like
really.
Heliocentrism was a controversial thing around then with Copernicus and Galileo.
Yeah.
You know, like I think Copernicus held off on releasing sort of his theories until he had died because he was afraid of getting like persecuted by the church and stuff. And there still was a strong belief that like everything revolves around the earth, because the earth is like the pinnacle of God's creation. Like, of course it does. But, you know, that was getting wobbly. But yeah, I recall learning later that the flat earth thing, like people had figured out it was a globe a long time ago.
Yeah, I actually kind of feel like, I kind of forgotten that, but yeah, like I do kind of remember almost being taught that like Christopher Columbus proved or that like Magellan did or whatever, because like, does the earth go around? Like, no, but like everybody kind of knew that it was round for like a pretty long time. Like it, you know, there might have been like, you know, people who weren't like educated, who like, you know, just had the intuitive sense that it was flat, or like for whom it didn't matter. But like among like those who were like educated and literate, like are interested in like, you know, science or physics, things like that, people like knew that it was round like basically forever.
Like you can see the bending of a horizon if you're like sailing on the high seas and shit. You know,
and there's like pretty simple experiments you can do to figure out like what's up. You know, it's not
not to piss off the flat earthers who are still out there, but I know.
I guess so. Right.
Kind of falling off actually, but. Yeah, like
but
yeah, that whole thing of like, kind of reframing the whole Columbus project and like the colonization of the New World is like just like an epic scientific discovery, you know, like it's like, you know, planting a flag on the moon, like it's just like, even though
or even like that it was like a, you know, like we, you know, I like people say like, oh yeah, well back then we didn't know about like, you know, like the New World, like we discovered it. It's like, well, you know, there were people there, you know, like we still talk about this like the New World. It's like, well, it's a New World. It's like, that's the thing. Like
people
like,
discovered it in like 25,000 BC.
Yeah, our intellectual tradition. But like that's the thing. Like it is like all of like these like ideas, like, you know, like about like what's reasonable, what's progressive, you know, like things like, you know, it's like, oh, you know, like for instance, like it's not reasonable to like believe this. It's reasonable, like, even though like, you know, this doesn't like disprove like, or, you know, like actually like to acknowledge this doesn't, you know, definitively make anything unreasonable or whatever, mean that nothing is or isn't reasonable. But like, that's all cultural, you know, like that's all like culturally contingent. Like at different times, like we're not like human brains didn't get bigger and then like that made them stop believing in jinn or whatever, you know, like that made like like Descartes, like realized
like,
that
kind of on that note, like there's one other big like historical event that happens, which I feel like is pertinent to the publishing of this pamphlet, or allegedly, like 1604 being when like followers of, or I guess descendants of followers of Christian Rosenkreuz like discover his tomb with a bunch of secret writing on it, and a thing that says, after 120 years I shall open. The big thing is that there's a supernova in 1604 that is like visible in space and like in the night sky, and people kind of like freak the fuck out over it, right?
Like signs in the sky, like astrological signs, like, I mean, you can go back to like the Star of Bethlehem and stuff like that, but like they there was a huge like attention to like the significance of like astrological signs during this period. Like it was like the Grand Conjunction, like that's something that's truly like transcultural. There's a good book about it actually that kind of talks about some of this. Let me see if I can remember the title. Is it What Time Is It There? I think it might be What Time Is It There? It's about kind of the interconnectedness of the world during the early modern period. And like kind of the different ideas of prophecy, including like astrology. But so
the conjunctions when planets seem to like line up close to one another.
There's this thing called like the Grand Conjunction, which is planets, like there's a cross that happens between like Saturn and Jupiter. I forget exactly what constitutes a Grand Conjunction. It's maybe Saturn, planets Jupiter and Saturn. It occurs every 20 years when Jupiter overtakes Saturn in its orbit. They're the rarest of the conjunctions that can between naked eye planets. So that's what's significant about it. So this is like seen to have like great like astrological prophetic importance. Like I remember like Timur was supposed to be like the Lord of Conjunction, like he was born under the sign of the Grand Conjunction, and he was like supposed to rise like like this is that had a lot of currency in the Islamic world during this time as well. And of course, like even in like the Americas, like the Aztecs like certainly weren't like not into astrology, like Amerindian cultures, the Mayans previously,
they had extremely sophisticated like astrological like calendars and systems that and I think in some cases go back pretty old, and like all their pyramids are like built, or at least a lot of the civilizations, like they're specifically built like in conjunction with certain either where the moon rises, or like on the solstices, like they perfectly rise over like the biggest temple and shit like that. It is truly, I mean, if you think about early human civilizations working with limited data to go off of, they all have the stars and they can notice patterns in the stars, and like it kind of makes sense that would be one of the most primordial like cross-cultural the phenomena basically. And I think because at one point there was like a Grand Conjunction, I forget if this was in 1604 or like in the years following, there was like a Grand Conjunction in Leo that people then interpreted as like one of these Protestant leaders from Europe is gonna like rise up and be the lion. Like there's all this prophecy about like the lion, and
that's
stuff.
Like really, really interesting. So there's this idea that like I'll just read the summary here from this pretty good book. It's by this guy Lyke de Vries. I don't know how to pronounce his name, but it's Lyke de Vries. Lyke. It's a pretty recent book about the Rosicrucians. It's Reformation, Revolution, Renovation: The Roots and Reception of the Rosicrucian Call for General Reform. That's the name of this book. But he has a good description of the lion. Within the manifestos, the reform of secular affairs was an undertaking not for human agency in general, but for the agency of a specific ruler. Right? Like this is key, and this is also like relates to the whole like astrological thing too. Like it's all about like what like resources, what like abilities can we give to this ruler that is going to enable us to like defeat like both the Catholic Church and also like the Turks, right? Because they oppose themselves, even though like all this is supposed to be derivative of like knowledge that they received from Dom Sar, they're still like, they denounce like the heresies of East and West, right? So like this, it's like it has a geopolitical like import in general, right? Like we're gonna help, the right guy, Anyway, so I'll just keep reading for this. This detail further distances the manifestos from Orthodox Lutheranism and aligns them with late medieval and radical Reformation expectations. The ruler mentioned by the Rosicrucians was to establish a new empire, which was an essential part of the Brethren's general Reformation. This ruler is depicted as a lion who will destroy the Pope and replace him as a leader of the people. The Pope will experience a shredding of his claws, and the new lion's roar will end his braying. The lion will defeat and replace the papal Antichrist and rule over the world. As noted above, it was the German-speaking lands that would defeat the Antichrist with great force and great thrust, making the expected lion a future German ruler. He will inaugurate a new era and claim Rosicrucian secrets whilst establishing his empire, as if he were to take as his guidance the Rosicrucians' revelations. Our treasures shall be left intact until the lion shall arise. This is a quote. Demand and claim them for himself as his own right, and use them for the establishment of his empire. Whilst Luther had denied the possibility of another earthly empire, stated that the Antichrist had come and that nothing could be done to defeat that figure except wait for Christ to come and triumph over the Roman impostor, in the Rosicrucian manifestos, a worldly ruler will make his appearance, defeat the Antichrist, and establish a new kingdom. So this is kind of interesting because
given people like Peter Thiel being obsessed with like
it does kind of remind you of Peter Thiel, because Peter Thiel obviously he's not also, like saying like I am the Antichrist or whatever. He's saying
I'm not going to say what Peter Thiel's nationality is. He's German. He's German.
What? But I mean, it is like, his whole thing with the Antichrist is like actually in a way sort of similar to this, because it's all about like how, if you basically his argument is like kind of like if you're scared of like AI and like Palantir and all this stuff, like if you're scared of like how this is going to ruin society, then that's going to actually enable the Antichrist, because the Antichrist is going to come and he's going to say, I'll make you safe. So you should just not be worried about like this like centralization of power by like big tech and like by me, basically
by Palantir.
So this is kind of like you actually can kind of, it is similar because it's interesting, because it's like, okay, well, the Pope is the Antichrist, so what we need is a new lion to rise who's going to take over the world and like dominate him, even though like there's no precedent for this idea in like existing Lutheran theology, like which actually says that like Christ is going to defeat the Antichrist. This is something that happens at the end of time.
Right.
Actually, they're like, no, actually, like the Antichrist is like the Pope, and like then like the lion's going to beat him, and then everything's going to be epic. And it's like, what? Like it's like, oh, okay, like it's kind of like.
Do they mean to imply that every pope is like the Antichrist? Like, the Antichrist is just here as long as there's a pope. Like every pope, it's like the office of the Antichrist is like filled, continuously. Yeah. Okay, so you have to get rid of the papacy itself. Is the Antichrist great?
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah, and obviously, the sort of Hitler parallels are kind of like when they're describing the great German lion that's going to rise up and take over the world, and who's going to have access to secret wisdom,
exactly.
Maybe they were onto something. I don't know. But that is fascinating.
It's exactly. Like it's kind of like this, but you can kind of see. So it's not just like this kind of like, they were like taking down the darkness and oppression of the Middle Ages and bringing us into the Renaissance. Like the Enlightenment. Like no, they believed in absolute monarchy. And they believed in a German lion who will rise and use occult secrets to dominate the world. Like
that's
it's not
a really good point to make. Is that you could easily be tricked, and I'm sure probably modern Rosicrucians today would do this, and they would put this spin on the story that these are Heckin based kind of secularist utopians that wanted to get us away from religious superstition, and therefore they're kind of progressive historically, they were ahead of their time, and they were blah blah blah. But other books I've read, they do make the distinction that just because they wanted to overthrow the kind of conservative Catholic order in Europe and blah 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 does not mean that they were left, even by that term didn't really exist yet, but like that they weren't like anti-hierarchical and anti-traditional, and they were still deeply conservative. Like you said, they still viewed like, you know, the Ottoman Empire and like Islam as like a threat equally.
Yeah.
You know, like they kind of did like have a vision of like wanting to take over the world. And this also was to the extent that the people that sort of produced this memo, whoever they were, you know, were around. A lot of them were like, I think we have to assume like kind of orbiting the courts of like nobles.
Well, it's
and,
kind
like,
of this thing, like this is like kind of like, you know, this is this whole thing of like where everything is seen through this prism of like, okay, well, who's on the left and who's on the right and who's a liberal and who's a conservative. And it's like, first of all, like this is kind of like before any of those ideas took root. I think we can say that like they did believe in an idea of progress, but the idea of progress is not like necessarily good. Like it's not like, you know, onto like that's what I'm talking about, where like these are cultural values that have been embedded into us that we associate like progress with good. And I'm not, by the way, saying that like the early modern or pre-modern Catholic Church was like a good institution and that like these guys were on like the right side. I'm just saying that like, you know, like they're like, it's not like so like a simple story of goodies and baddies. And in fact, there were like uniquely unique ideas that were being generated in movements like this that like have had like possibly like the whole idea like where we're kind of divesting humanity like of its soul. You could make an argument that like at a certain point like the Christian ability to like underwrite a genocide becomes exhausted. You know, the traditional Christian ability to underwrite a genocide becomes exhausted. So you need to develop like a more like mechanistic view of things, or, you know, a more kind of like absolute concept. I mean, of course, you know, I'm not saying that these guys aren't Christian, but I'm saying like, you know, drawing this into the future, seeing the connection with this to Bacon, to like Descartes, to like, you know, these like this sort of influences, like, and you can see like, and this like seeing like how they do see the world. And you're right, like it's not like, you know, it's not like the like again, it's like the conservative versus like, okay, so like when we talk about people being conservative, like, okay, was Peter Thiel a conservative? Like you know, he like got on the stage of the RNC and said, I'm a conservative, but he doesn't want to conserve anything.
Right.
Like he wants to just dominate, like build a new like system where like we're all his slaves and like our brains are uploaded to a cloud and like have to like go on a hamster wheel to power like Rocco's Basilisk or something.
Yeah.
Like
well,
in what way is
have to
conservative?
we almost have to separate both like the terms liberal and conservative into like a capitalized version and a not capitalized person, because like you could be say like you could be a lowercase liberal, which I think normally would mean that you're like you know, you're kind of on the like the left side of things, like to an extent. You're not a conservative, but also you could be like a conservative radical that like, you know, like, but then in Britain being like a capital L liberal, or, you know, like a classical liberal is almost like a that is like what we'd consider conservative, like a sort of like in terms of being not pushing and like respecting institutions and like established authority. That's almost like a tendency. I mean, you could even say the same thing about like communism in the 20th century, that there were like liberal communists and like conservative communists, and like the conservative communists were like Stalin, you know what I mean? Like,
you need to like actually, like,
but like, you know what I mean? Like,
you need to divide it even like more, because like there's like so many like dimensions to like the idea, like, you know, for instance, like communism is like ultimately, or like Marxism, that's ultimately like a liberal tradition. Like it's in the liberal tradition of thought. Like if you go through Capital, like all the work, like thinkers that he's citing and building off of are like Adam Smith, like, you know, et cetera, like all these like economic thinkers, like, you know, of the preceding centuries. Like he is like that is coming out of like the liberal intellectual tradition in a broad, like in a very broad sense. Like Marx is a liberal. Like now, you know, like in American politics, like online Marxism, it's like freaking libs. But like, you know, when we're talking about like liberalism versus like, you know,
if you're zooming out to
like
the grand thrusts of like historical ideas, like it, and if you tie it back to the origins of like the French Revolution, especially,
exactly,
like, what side are you ultimately on? Like, absolutely, he's on that side.
Yeah,
but,
we're talking about like versus like the ancient regime and like monarchy and stuff like that. Like that's obviously
right.
Yeah, like if we're talking about that divide, then
right,
totally.
And of course, as much as like those people are like the epitome of conservatism, they also, as we could see by some of them, like collaborating with the Nazis and being like insane eugenicists, like in the 20th century, and like I don't know, King Leopold in the Congo, like they can be like very radical in a certain type of way. And even if you go back to, I was thinking about the parallels between the development of like America as a kind of a colony in the North, like largely populated by like offshoots of Calvinism, to a large degree, and how like the Ivy Leagues are a great example of something that started off as like a seminary, basically, to like teach like religious education. And over time, it became a place to like teach and reproduce like the capitalist ruling class, and like the same families that would have sent their sons there to be, preachers or something like that in like the late 1600s. By the mid 1800s, they're sending them there to like learn how to run insurance companies and like take over railroads and be in secret societies and shit. And it totally takes on a different thing. There's even mention of the post-Lutheran revolution, like in some of the the kingdoms in the Holy Roman Empire that went Protestant. Like I think it was in this one, The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians, where he said that like they're grandfathers of these princes, like 100 years later, in around the time these manifestos come out, like the grandfathers probably would be turning over in their graves, because what they'd essentially done is like privatized the old Catholic Church and then like controlled it as part of like your fiefdom, like your feudal fiefdom kind of thing. And of course, a lot of them became more like business minded and like strayed from the original kind of purifying vision that like Luther had, and almost in the same pattern as like what Americans would later do, where like you said, sometimes the capacity for like to do a genocide like it gets exhausted. Like Christianity as a kind of justifying rubric for that gets exhausted, and maybe you have to like pull back to like rationality at a certain point.
That's the thing, like this is like the sort of crucible of, no pun intended, this is the crucible of like capitalism and like everything. Like if you want to talk about capitalism as like a world system or like whatever, like this is like where that like tradition of thought and like emerges from. Like again, like it really depends like what framework you have, like a technological determinist one where it's like, oh, incidentally this just like came about here, like, or is there an epistemological dimension to it, right? Like if like again, like is there a reason why like it was Europeans like who were like, oh, let's like start like just slaughtering people, right? Like there is like a huge difference in the scale. Like even like during this period, like like for instance, like one of the biggest critics of Rosicrucianism we read about probably in that article that we'll talk about in a little bit, Fournier, I think is how you say his name. He like was Jesuit. Like a big I don't know if he was himself a Jesuit, but he was inspired by Del Rio, who was Martin Del Rio, who was another big Jesuit and like a big a writer on the phenomenon of witchcraft. And that's relevant is because like during this time, like people kind of get like when you imagine like, oh, like the witchcraft, like that's like a medieval belief, or like we're going back to medieval times, the darkness of the dark ages. It's like actually the witchcraft burnings, like witch trials, that was like a phenomenon of this time, the early modern period, the time of the Renaissance and the glory. Like it was like that, like these mass killings of like 500 old women at a time. Like not just old women, we don't want to like say that, like obviously like there were also like men of the ruling classes, like, but disproportionately, old women definitely were overrepresented in these, like
in terms of who actually got persecuted for it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, true. The accusations and the persecutions are imbalanced, and of course, even the persecutions, it wasn't just uniformly like this. It wasn't totally based on sex, but the still like definitely had that character. Like your sort of stereotypical witch was still like the victim more often than not, and so like. That that's like part and parcel of like the killing of Taínos, like the the subjugation in Haiti, like all like this like are those things like not like connected? And if not, like why didn't it happen before? Like they are related. And that's the thing, like where, do like while we don't like, like obviously while that critique like may have been important, what went wrong? What went wrong that like we end up with Hitler, that we end up with like these, like
global
these atrocities that like make the
genocide.
Medieval church look like nothing by comparison.
Slavery, like they like for sure. The medieval church did like a lot of. I mean, they conducted wars, they did crusades. So the Inquisition was kind of had been going
they
on
persecuted
for a while
heretics.
Now.
Like
they would have their own. I was saying to you, like this is reading a little bit here in this type of history. This is kind of what we were talking about when we talked about Jesuits like the other week, and like this is kind of their like, for lack of a better term, like KGB era, where they're actively involved basically in like counterintelligence and like counterinsurgency, even like intellectual like counterinsurgency against like critics and anybody like subverting the church and like its doctrines. And they're responsible for like making sure it takes hold and like spreads in the New World and all this shit. So they're very active. And I mean, I think what often maybe gets lost in, because you're absolutely right about like this witchcraft like persecution thing, the witch hunt era, the satanic panic, did happen in this like later like kind of pre-modern like proto-capitalistic like colonialist period. And but what was going on at the same time was with shit like the Rosicrucian manifestos coming out, there was a lot of like fear on all sides that the leaders themselves of these countries were consorting with mages and sorcerers and occultists that were basically like getting them to do devil worship. And like obviously that was easily like a rhetorical weapon to use against either the Protestants could say it about the satanic, papacy and how it's like the Antichrist on earth and they're basically doing like devil whatever. And then on the flip side, you have these critics of Rosicrucian, like these Catholic defenders that are saying like, no, like not only are these Rosicrucians like sus, like occultists that are like worshiping devils, but like Calvinism is devil worship. Like these fucking sicko Calvinists, they're insane. Like they're absolutely fucking insane, and they are going to take over everywhere they can and turn.
They have
into,
a little
like,
bit
nightmare.
of a point.
They have a little bit of a point.
Yeah, like that's a good example.
Do.
It's like I feel like maybe for like your average like American like leftist or Marxist, like it might be like a little bit harder to see like, but the base Rosicrucians like, but they're like all about enlightenment and like science. It's like, okay, well, which is the good side between the Catholic Church and Calvinism? Like that's like kind of the thing. Like,
both heavily implicated in slavery and like wiping out indigenous peoples in the New World. Like they're almost like between North and South America. They both did some real fucked up shit. So none of them come out great, but at the same time, I think I'm more in like the, like I don't think I need to pick a dog in this fight but I think, people might have the urge to be like the Rosicrucians were actually based or like whatever, and it's like,
and what
that's a little too easy. Like don't fall.
What that's doing is like and this is like maybe a hot take, but what that's doing is it's buying into this progressive narrative of history, which was baked into the Rosicrucianism, right? That's the thing. Like the line is going to come, and everything's going to just keep getting better and better, which is different from this idea of like, okay, well then Jesus, Jesus is going to come back, and like all we can do is like wait in misery, and then like Jesus will come and the world will end. But instead it's like everything, like knowledge is going to get better. And as we learn more, like we're going to learn, like that's like this progressive teleological narrative of history where like you can recognize this as like part of this kind of like Whig narrative where like Whig historiography, where everything like just society gets better and better and better. And then, in to do the sort of reductive Fukuyama thing, which like, wasn't exactly his point. He was actually kind of saying, he actually kind of predicted a little bit what we're seeing now, but like, you reach the end of history, you get to like the best thing ever, which is liberal democracy, as epitomized by like the United States, like around circa 1990. And then like, because people get restless, like they try to ruin that, which was what Fukuyama was trying to say. But, that's still like the best, and it should be the end of history. Like history should like end in that, or maybe like that can keep perfecting itself, get more and more liberal and more democratic. That like idea of continual teleological progress, like that will just learn and more and grow and grow and grow. That's like baked into like this, Rosicrucian epistemology, but also like, other, sort of renovations of knowledge happening during this time. And that is kind of like a little bit of a psyop. Like, or it's really that is truly an on top. Like that is like. And that, like, you do see that in Marx as well, right? That from a Marxist perspective, capitalism is ultimately like good because like it brings us towards communism, right? Like it has to happen.
It has to happen. There's definitely a teleology about
like the bourgeoisie will like bring itself down. It will develop the means of its own destruction.
About where like the end times will we'll finally get to the promised land one day. Like,
and it's inevitable because like it's baked into. But is that true?
I don't believe that it is. I don't think you can honestly say it's inevitable. Is it possible?
Yes.
Yes, it is possible. I believe it is possible, and broadly, like worth fighting for. Might as well have a world that doesn't destroy itself and becomes like somewhat better. I'd even say that about the Whigs, and the libs. Like I get it. Like you want to be oriented around making the world maybe a better place than you found it, and not have it slide into like destruction. That's like the kind of the best thing about having like a civilization or a culture that is like strong and resilient or whatever. That said, like we live in a world with nuclear weapons now. Part of that, was driven by people with this mentality over hundreds of years of just wanting to like, steal the secrets of the universe. And, to the point where now we have bombs that could kill everybody. We could create bioweapons that could kill everybody. Like, so I'm not confident enough to say that like, and I think it was probably a mistake for maybe some 20th century, like, communists to sort of oversell it, like especially in maybe it felt a little bit like in the 60s and 70s, like, oh look, the West is all fucked up, like they're having a profitability crisis, blah blah blah. But like Lenin and Marx both warned that don't like you remember that America Against America book by the Chinese Politburo member, where he like points out that Marxists have been wrong about this in the past. That like, oh, like capitalism's on its last legs. Like it's look how fucked up and irrational it is. Like definitely with like the next wave of either the advances of socialism or the crises of capitalism, like it's inevitably going to break. And it's like you don't want to underestimate your enemy like that, like your historical adversary, so to speak, because like it wasn't exhausted yet. Like they found new ways to assert control and like preserve their power and deepen like capitalist logic, throughout and extended across the world. So clearly, I mean, now it feels kind of cooked, but I think those are moments of opportunity. Also, it's like Marx says this, even the designation of like the proletariat is like I feel like a big reason why he zooms in on that is not necessarily because it's like an eternal truth of like even capitalism, like the capitalist epoch or like reality, that like the proletarian is like spiritually endowed to like be the leaders of the revolution. It's like, well, what if then the capitalists read that and they're like, oh shit, let's offload our entire industry to like another country and then like gut all the unions and then make everybody a service worker. Like, then it just got a little more complicated, and it's like not clear. You don't like literally. He pointed it because that's a weak point in the chain. Like you could withhold your labor, you could shut down plants, like you could squeeze the capitalists where they're weak. And I think there's still like places you could do it, but like they've made it harder. They've clearly made it harder.
Yeah,
like, that's why
like exactly. Like, well, I mean, look at us. Like we're podcasters. We're not stevedores. Like the best we could do is talk about the Rosicrucians, on YouTube, like rather than like go on a general strike,
I guess the writers, the WGA and the actors went on strike, but now they're gonna get like they're threatened with being replaced by AI and like Hollywood's dead. So even that, like they have a way of just like they'd rather punish.
And also like entertainment production is not like as important as like making sure people like have their food and like that, like we have power and things like that, like, like so, manufacturing, like it's not like as crucial, and like a lot of like the entertainment, like all those people like are hopelessly like indoctrinated, like ideologically like warped. Like basically like there's like in order to, you know, they're basically like state propagandists most of the time. Like at best, like they oppose like the current like administration, but not like the regime. You know,
well, you
like
remember like Pynchon makes this point in Vineland where like by the early 80s all of the people that like they end up shutting down a lot of like the kind of COINTELPRO like informant kind of network because they realize that like everyone is volunteering to be like a snitch and a cop, and like they want to like work for the government because they've been so psyoped by like cop shows on TV, like The Tube. Like he really, that's a huge part of that book is like the addiction of the tube. And I think there's a great line near the end where he said, you know, some guy's telling him like, you know, like no offense, but you 60s kids, you know, you 60s radicals, like, you know, you had some good ideas and like you cared, but the minute you like turned on that tube, it was all over. Just like the Indians, you sold it to your worst enemies for nothing, and then like they got you. And now it's the 80s, and like everyone's like psyop, and like just think about that times 1,000 for like the internet and like the impact of the internet on our culture to kind of like, you know, mystify things, distract people, get people like, you know, like get their dopamine jacked into just like, you know, slop content that is now going to be increasingly automated. Our entire economy is running on like this like AI bubble that may or may not burst at any moment. Like it's really, we're on rickety foundations, and it's kind of like, but besides moving goods around that get imported from other countries and like a certain level of domestic production, it's just, you know, it's like a different landscape. So I think
that bubble is like basically like sustained by the idea that like like basically like this whole idea that like, okay, well, we're gonna create like an artificial brain that like this like that. I mean, I do feel like it's weird because like you could say like, oh, that kind of in a way almost like in and of itself disproves the like technological determinism, because there isn't any technology that is determining like the way that our thought process is gravitating toward this idea that the human being like is nothing but a computer that can be like replicated, because they haven't done that. If they did that, and then it was like, oh, okay, I guess we have to face the facts that like consciousness is all like, you know, like mechanical, and like the human soul isn't real because you can like, you know, and that like a human being can create this AI, and like they didn't get struck by lightning, and like, you know, we're nothing more than like whatever. Like we have to accept like their epistemology because they did this like thaumaturgical Rosicrucian miracle. But
yes,
much like in the case of the Rosicrucians, there is like there isn't this thing.
No.
It's like talked about, and so like, oh, we have all these treasures, we have like that we're ready to share with you. Oh, great Prince Lion who will rise and like rule the world. But we're not going to show you though. Like you can't see it. Like, you know, you can't see it. Like anyone out there who like wants to be on our team, like get in touch. But like and like you'll have untold like knowledge and like great occult secrets. But no, like, you know, I'm not going to tell you what they are now. Like. You know,
just like QAnon, you have to wait for the big drop and like the storm to come, but like trust us, like we have the secret knowledge. And even AI like operates on that kind of like, just wait, like in 3 years, like you're not even gonna believe what it's gonna do. Like it's gonna basically be our god, you know, whatever. Like they're trying to build this like Pista Sophia machine, kind of this Pista Sophia golem. I've noticed, interestingly, because it comes up in the Rosicrucian story, that like that like Christian like conspiracy guy who went on like Tucker Carlson to talk about like coil and the fucking shit. Like I think he brought up, this is a hot take I'm seeing bounce around now, that like OpenAI and these AI companies in Silicon Valley are run by essentially Kabbalists, and like the building the AI system, the large language model, is like an expression of Kabbalistic principles, and almost you could say like alchemical like principles, and therefore now, I mean, in a vibes-based sense, yeah, I could see it. In terms of the coding somehow being like, or like philosophically, is Sam Altman like you know, a student of the Kabbalah? I have no idea. But It's interesting that's bouncing around right now because also the Rosicrucians were influenced by Kabbalah, like, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, I think like that in a way, like Kabbalah, like a lot, like the one of the key like sort of techniques of Kabbalah is like the magic square, which is basically like a primitive computer or like mathematical matrix. Like a lot, like I think that
right.
like insofar as that guy is, I'm sure this is not like what he means. I don't know, but like again, I've never even heard of this guy until now. Like now he's come up twice, but like
right. I have no
the
idea.
like yeah, I think that
right.
it's kind of like okay, well, alchemy is like we could say the chemical wedding of Christian Rose, right? It's called the chemical wedding, right? But that's
wedding.
like chemistry and alchemy, like they aren't necessarily like distinct, in the same way
Right.
like Kabbalah and like mathematics, like they are kind of distinct, but they do like bleed into one another. So like you can
Right. All
always
the
like anything
numerology,
that involves like
gematria.
math or computation. Gematria is like a little bit, that's a very specific thing. But
I guess
like,
so. Yeah. But like numerology, like the idea that every letter has like a numerical value and like blah blah, and that's like significant.
Yeah,
I mean,
and like you could probably even draw like you could say like there's like a gematria like aspects to like the idea of AI because you're like creating like an artificial like being, a disembodied like intelligence to commuate with, like it. I mean,
You're
AI
creating a
does have that
golem.
sort of like
It
a
is
Ouija board. Like it's not a golem though. Like at least with LLMs, because like a golem is body and no spirit, whereas like
this is all spirit.
this is like all like I mean, it's interesting because it's kind of like all language and no spirit or body, but which is like very magical if you think about it. But like this you could definitely like draw, because like this is like where like a lot of like our modern, like they're talking about like we want to change, like get Aristotle out of the curriculum, like change this. They talk about physics and mathematics, like all those things are like a super big interest to them, right? Like they like I mean they are like learned people, like whoever wrote this is, we can talk about maybe some authorship theories in a bit, or like the big authorship theory in a bit, but like whoever wrote these things is like learned person who's like very invested in like the universities. Even today like you see people who like really have like not much of a stake in like the academic life or anything like that, very concerned with like universities and like their epistemic power to like affect the beliefs of the populace, right? Like
100%.
Like I mean, we
right
see
now.
a concerted attack on exactly. So like that was the same thing during the time of the Rosicrucian manifestos. Like basically it was the state, the church, or like religion, like institutional religion, and like the universities, like which obviously overlap, but like those like domains like were the ones that like these need to like get shaken up like heavily, and so like insofar as like the education there like deals with all these topics, they were relevant for them. It wasn't just about like again, like that's like kind of the difference between like when people think like, oh, the Rosicrucians, they think of thinking of something like a Mork. That is like, we are esoteric, we do magic, like we're all about magic, but obviously this is something that is like much broader than just like we are like a bunch of magicians, like that's part of it, but like it's more than that. It's like politics,
I know it's like it's not just this, but it does function basically like a psyop. Like they're going out and like spreading calculated disinformation. They're learned, like educated people that are kind of aiming to like shake things up in the discourse and create the illusion of something that isn't at that point existing, but in a way it's like a way of manifesting it, right? Like look at something like QAnon, right? Like QAnon bubbled up like in I think 2017, and it sort of like combined a few previous threads of things like Pizzagate and like other stuff, and just like the MAGA movement, 4chan, whatever. And then, I think we all thought for a minute after January 6th and, the storm, I guess it was like the Capitol riots, but like they, it didn't change anything ultimately. And then like Q went away. Remember? Like during COVID, Q just like vanished. I forget if it was like before or after. I think it was around the election time. I forget when maybe Q like somebody like got control of its like trip code, and like maybe there was like an 8chan queue for a while that some people didn't trust but kept posting. Like it's all vague. But then they go totally radio silent after like January 6th. Like there's nothing. But then now, look where we are now. Like this feels a hell of a lot more like the quote unquote storm than January 6th did, which felt like a big LARP fest from like people who are worked up and, on the internet and shit, and probably some like, crazy Proud Boy, whatever, boogaloo type motherfuckers, and probably some feds and whatever. But now they're marching through the institutions. They're like they're, pouring money on ICE. They're building like migrant camps. Like they're firing people for like blatantly political reasons. Like Trump is like threatening to arrest JB Pritzker, which is like, we told you he'd be relevant one day. But there's like this, like a lot of this, the way Stephen Miller's acting feels like he's enacting the storm of QAnon, though nobody says Q, but everyone, it's like, so in a way, it's like by putting the meme out there and getting everybody so invested in it, even though it was a psyop and it was fake, it contributed to like allowing it to actually come somewhat to pass. Like, I mean, I don't know if we'll see Hillary Clinton hanged on the steps of the Capitol until she's dead anytime soon, or like sent to Guantanamo Bay, but they are like prosecuting Jim Comey, and like, they're in a much more Q kind of vibe. So like I could see potential, I don't know, like the parallels between Rosicrucians themselves like talking about a thing that doesn't actually exist, but in a way that it becomes enough of a meme that it like inspires people to build in like secret societies or explore these ideas. Or I mean, there are cases of people that like try to find, didn't Descartes go on a trip to Germany and he like desperately tried to find the Rosicrucians, but then he couldn't?
People say that like he definitely was like interested in like the Rosicrucians. Like I kind of wanted to like read this one like thing from Descartes that I flagged, like because it comes up, it's mentioned in Marx's Capital too, and it like is it comes up in a couple of things. Like it comes up in Dudley's Discourse on Trade, which I think Marx is like in direct conversation with Sir Dudley North.
Okay.
Yeah. I think is the guy, like Dudley North is Dudley North, the economist, right? So yeah, not Dudley last name. I don't know why I said that. Yeah, Dudley on a first name basis with him, but yeah, he was like one of these leading economists. I'll read what Marx says about him in Capital, but yeah, so this is what Descartes says in his discourse on the method, right? I had never made much account of what has proceeded from my own mind, and so long as I gathered no other advantage from the method I employ beyond satisfying myself on some difficulties belonging to the speculative sciences, or endeavoring to regulate my actions according to the principles it taught me, I never thought myself bound to publish anything respecting it. For in what regards manners, every one is so full of his own wisdom that there might be found as many reformers as heads, if any were allowed to take upon themselves a task of mending them, except those whom God had constituted as supreme rulers of his people, or to whom he has given sufficient grace and zeal to be prophets. And although my speculations greatly pleased myself, I believe that others had theirs, which perhaps pleased them still more. But as soon as I had acquired some general notions respecting physics, and beginning to make trial of them in various peculiar difficulties, had observed how far they can carry us, and how much they differ from the principles that had been employed up to the present time, I believe that I could not keep them concealed without sinning grievously against the law by which we are bound to promote, as far as in us lies, the general good of mankind. For by them I perceived it to be possible to arrive at knowledge highly useful in life, and in room of the speculative philosophy usually taught in schools, to discover a practical, by means of which, knowing the force and action of fire, water, air, the stars, the heavens, and all the other bodies that surround us, as distinctly as we know the various crafts of our artisans, with a Z, we might also apply them in the same way to all the uses to which they are adapted, and thus render ourselves the lords and possessors of nature. And this is a result to be desired, not only to the invention of an infinity of arts, by which we might be enabled to enjoy without any trouble the fruits of the earth and all its comforts, but also and especially for the preservation of health, which is, without doubt, of all the blessings of this life, the first and fundamental one. For the mind is so intimately dependent upon the condition and relation of the organs of the body, that if any means can ever be found to render man wiser and more ingenious than hitherto, I believe that it is in medicine that they must be sought for. That's an important note, because again, that was going to be like the main vocation of the Rosicrucians. They say in the Confessio, right, that or I think it's in the Fama, that they like the main thing that they're gonna do is like heal the sick, right? Like
no, I think they promise to unleash like medical cures and things like that.
Yeah. Like that was like going to be like the main vocation of a member of the Rosicrucians, that he would like, seek no profession but healing the sick. So he says, it is true the science of medicine as it now exists contains few things whose utility is very remarkable, but without any wish to deprecate it, I am confident there is no one, even among those whose profession it is, who does not admit that all at present known in it is almost nothing in comparison of what remains to be discovered, and that we could free ourselves from an infinity of maladies of the body as well as of mind, and perhaps also even from the debility of age, if we had sufficiently ample knowledge of their causes, and of all the remedies provided to us by nature. But since I designed to employ my whole life in the search after so necessary a science, and since I had fallen in with a path which seems to me such, that if any one follow it, he must inevitably reach the end desired, unless he be hindered either by the shortness of life or the want of experiments, I judge that there could be no more effectual provision against these two impediments than if I were faithfully to communicate to the public all the little that I might myself have found, and incite men of superior genius to strive to proceed farther, by contributing, each according to his inclination and ability, to the experiments which it would be necessary to make, and also by informing the public of all they might discover, so that, by the last beginning, where those before them had left off, and thus connecting the lives and labors of many, we might collectively proceed much farther than each by himself could do. So, as you can tell, that is like basically like the same call to arms as like the Rosicrucian like manifestos, the Confessio and the Fama. It's like medicine is like the key thing. If we study nature and we get rid of like all this bullshit that we've been taught in schools, and we like actually like apply ourselves to the study of like the human body, we can become immortal basically, but like
live forever.
Yeah, well, that's like we can cure ourselves of age,
right.
But we can also, just discover all these great new things, and like it's the same sort of thing of like, I have the secret knowledge, but like here I am publishing it. I didn't think I was going to, but I'm going to publish it, and now like other men like need to link up with me. So you can definitely see like the influence, and like I think you're right that like it was an influence on him, and like he did like know of it, and like that, like obviously like Rene Descartes is like very important in the intellectual history like of Europe in general, and at this point like of the world,
of course,
but like, and he like in discourses sorry, what'd you say?
Cogito ergo sum.
Yeah, exactly. But like
slogan of the AI lords.
There's this one guy, I think it was Dussel, I forget who it was, someone said like that, like cogito ergo sum, like you like that like goes hand in hand with like conquero ego sum, like like I think therefore I am, and like I conquer, like therefore I am, like this. God, and you can see the whole thing of like we need to dominate nature, right? And like this is like the reduction of the natural world to matter that is simply just like brute matter to be used like by human beings, like purely mechanical. This is like the quote unquote disenchantment, right? Like we don't have any like responsibility. This is just like the world is one giant machine. Maybe this is like a good time to talk about the chemical wedding, because there's this idea of like the universe, like this very like mechanistic, very much like a kind of like a machine, and this like factors into that. But before that, like this guy like Sir Dudley North talks about like he spells it, he puts a space between it. So hold on, the control F for des space carts. Here. So yeah, this is like one of the leading economists of the 17th century, I think. When did he was he active? Yeah, he died at the end of the 17th century. This method of reasoning hath been introduced with a new philosophy. The old dealt in abstracts more than truths, and was employed about forming hypotheses to fit abundance of precarious and insensible principles, such as direct or oblique course of the atoms in vacuo, matter and form, privation, solid orbs, fuga vacui, and many others like nature, whereby they made sure of nothing. But upon the appearance of Descartes' excellent dissertations in De Methodo, so much approved and accepted in our ages, as those chimeras soon dissolved and vanished. And hence it is that knowledge in great measure is become mechanical, which word I need not interpret farther than by noting it here means built upon clear and evident truths, But yet this great improvement of reason, which the world hath lately obtained, is not diffused enough, and resides chiefly with the studious and the learned, the common people having but a small share. For they cannot abstract so as to have a true and just thought of the most ordinary things, but are possessed and full of the vulgar errors of sense, except in some few things that fall within the compass of their day labor, and so gives them an experience, as when a common seaman, with all his ignorance, proves a better mechanic for actual service than the professor himself, with all his learning. Yeah, so this idea, like, knowledge has become mechanical. I'm not going to explain what it means other than that, it is based on like evident truth, right?
Mhm.
And then this is like where this comes up in Capital, right? He's talking about an analysis and comparison of the prices of commodities produced by handicrafts or manufacturers and of the prices of the same commodities produced by machinery shows generally that in the product of machinery, the value due to the instruments of labor increases relatively, but decreases absolutely. In other words, its absolute amount decreases, but its amount relatively to the total value of the product of a pound of yarn, for instance, increases. And then, like typical, Capital. But then he has this quote: the portion of value which is added by the machinery decreases both absolutely and relatively when the machinery does away with horses and other animals that are employed as mere moving forces, and not as machines for changing the form of matter. It may here be incidentally observed that Descartes, in defining animals as mere machines, saw with eyes of the manufacturing period, while to the eyes of the Middle Ages, animals were assistants to man, as they were later to von Haller in his Restauration des Staatswissenschaften. I haven't read that or don't know what it is, but that Descartes, like Bacon, another important figure, who is definitely influenced heavily by the Rosicrucians, anticipated an alteration in the form of production and the practical subjugation of nature by man as a result of the altered methods of thought is plain from his Discours de la Méthode. There he says, that quote that I just read.
Mm-hmm.
In the preface to Sir Dudley North's Discourses on Trade, it is stated that Descartes' method has begun to free political economy from the old fables and superstitious notions of gold, trade, etc. On the whole, however, the early English economists sided with Bacon and Hobbes as their philosophers, while at a later period, the philosopher Katechone, I guess that's the Kathekon, the ultimate political economy in England and France and Italy was Locke. But yeah, so it is interesting to see, like, in Capital, that idea that, like, this new idea of thought that comes from Descartes, like, changed the game, as it were, and like brought about this idea of the subjugation of nature totally to man. Right.
First, they came for the horses, and I said nothing, for I was not a horse. And now they're like, oh, why do we need humans? So, like, just evolute yourself. Like, everybody's a machine. This is where it starts. Oh, that horse over there, it's just a machine.
And then
you get eventually, it's like, even 20th century, people are saying, like, yeah, you're just like basically a wet CPU. That starts.
Well, I mean, humans, like, it's only it doesn't take too long for, like, humans are animals. It's like a little while to like get to that point, because like, it's very difficult to like partition to break, because obviously, like, we have this like society, like, we build buildings, we do all these things, like our world is a human world, and we're like, but we're animals, and like eventually, like, once that like barrier drops, then it's like, okay, well, humans are just machines, and or they're just dirt. They what
from dirt.
Yeah, exactly. A very famous figure had to say about human beings. They can just be like, they're expendable. And like those like ideas, like, I think kind of bleed into each other. Emily, look at what we're facing now, right? Like, it's not just like that. We see like the like mass death of human beings on a huge scale, like, but also like, it's not nothing that like the world is also like falling apart, like the planet itself, like, obviously, like, not to be like the like a what's it called, deep green
eco-doomer,
like,
deep ecologist.
Not to be like a deep ecologist or whatever, but I mean, like, not to not be like that completely either, and not to like wave away the fact that like whether you care about animals or not, like, that's going to affect human beings. That's going to affect, like, that's, and I think, like, they're connected, right? We all live on this planet. You know, like it's just like,
and we're living beings. We share a lot in common with animals because we are. And I think
we're supposed to be like custodians of the earth, but we're you know, kind of shifted into exploiters, like, you know, and
clearly the way we've organized our society is sort of leading us down that path. But yeah, we seem to be incapable of changing it. And I don't know. Our rulers now, especially the Silicon Valley people, maybe the neo-Rosicrucians, I think they almost, some of them, you know, they resent their animality. They resent the fact that they're going to die one day, that they're not immortal, and et cetera, and they don't like that humans are animals. Like, it makes them, I don't know, they want to be gods, and, you know, it's you know, but, you know, it is what it is. We're animals. So, I guess, you know, I would tell them to get over it, but they're not going to get over it, because, you know, well, the Rosicrucians were visited by the lady, basically, in the chemical wedding. So it's supposed to be Rosencreutz, right? That gets this vision.
This is different from the other two manifestos because it's like in the first person, and it like tells like this elaborate allegorical story. Yeah, I'll actually use Luke DeVry's summary here because I thought he had a pretty good summary of like what happens in the chemical wedding. It's like, you know, not a text we could read like entirely, but it's, you know, to spare people having to look it up. Let me get it open if I can. Somewhere around here. Hold on. Sorry. Oh, no. Is this it? No. Sorry, I lost it. Live radio. I think I can. No, that's not it either.
Let me just read the first paragraph.
Oh, okay,
Let me just read the first two paragraphs.
Yeah. It's good to read some of it because it has flavor. Yeah.
It reminded me of a certain one-shotted UFO experiencer that we talked about recently. Was it Chris Bledsoe? Who talked about the lady. This is major lady vibes. It opens here, titled "The First Day." On an evening before Easter Day, I sat at a table, and having, as my custom was, in my humble prayer, sufficiently conversed with my Creator, and considered many great mysteries, whereof the Father of Lights, His Majesty, had shown me not a few, and being now ready to prepare in my heart, together with my dear Pascal Lamb, a small, unleavened, undefiled cake. Okay. All of a sudden arose so horrible a tempest, that I imagined no other but that through its mighty force the hill on which my little house was founded would fly into pieces. But inasmuch as this and the like from the devil, who had done me many a spite, was no new thing to me, I took courage and persisted in my meditation, till somebody in an unusual manner touched me on the back, whereupon I was so hugely terrified that I dared hardly look about me. Yet I showed myself as cheerful as, in such occurrences, human frailty would permit. Now the same thing still twitching me several times by the coat, I looked back, and behold, it was a fair and glorious lady, whose garments were all sky-colored, and curiously, like heaven, bespangled with golden stars. In her right hand she bore a trumpet of beaten gold, on which a name was engraved, which I could well read, but am as yet forbidden to reveal it. In her left hand she had a great bundle of letters of all languages, which she, as I afterwards understood, was to carry to all countries. She also had large and beautiful wings, full of eyes throughout, with which she could mount aloft, and fly swifter than any eagle. Wait, did he just say that she has eyeballs, like, in her wings?
Read it again. What does she say?
She also had large and beautiful wings, full of eyes throughout, with which she could mount aloft. Disturbing, but okay. I guess I'd be like overwhelmed with joy.
Could be like happened, a peacock, kind of. Yeah.
So that's how it kicks off. Like, you can tell this guy's having a lady experience. It really ain't nothing new. People are always having the mystical lady, you know, visitation kind of image. It was right before. It was on the eve of Easter. But yeah. So What
yeah,
else?
so this is
What
the
else
summary of
does he say
the
about
whole story. So
Okay.
at the beginning of the story, Procrastinus Christian Rosenkreutz receives from an angel an invitation to the wedding of the king and queen. He accepts, albeit hesitantly, and he sets out on his arduous journey the following morning. After a long and difficult walk on the second day and having overcome several hurdles, Rosenkreutz arrives at the castle, his destination, only just in time. There, the souls of the guests will be weighed the next morning on a golden balance to determine whether they are allowed to enter the castle. To his merits, this is also interesting. This is also kind of like a Islamic idea, but I guess you could trace it back to like, you know, other traditions as
Weighing
well,
a
like
soul
ancient
against
Egypt
gold.
and stuff. Yeah, yeah. Well, not weighing a soul against gold, but the idea of like the scale, the mizan,
right.
you know. But to his merit, Rosenkreutz passes the weighing test with such ease he could carry 8 weights instead of the requisite 7, that he is permitted the opportunity to bring with him into the castle a person of his own choosing. The person he chooses is described as an emperor, Kaiser. Together, they are 2 of the few worthy ones allowed to attend the wedding of the king and queen and to receive the golden fleece. The days which follow are taken up with festivities, dinners, tours in the castle, and most importantly, preparations for the wedding, during which a select few further demonstrate their worth. They engage in work of an alchemical nature. When 6 royal persons present at the castle are executed on the 4th day as part of the wedding preparations, their heads are used for an alchemical preparation from which ultimately the king and queen arise, brought to life through fire from heaven. On the 5th day, Rosenkreutz secretly observes the sleeping Venus, who was also in the castle but whom he was forbidden to visit. Rosenkreutz spying on Venus is revealed in the final day, and the book ends with his punishment for having seen her. He is condemned to guard the first portal to the castle until someone else commits the same offense and will have to take his place as guard. The text concludes with a statement that 2 folios, reportedly dealing with Rosenkreutz's return home, are missing, thereby rendering the story incomplete.
No, what the fuck? That's like the Hotel California, like German, you know, German version. What they cut people's heads off to use in an alchemical ritual? Cool.
Yes, and to create, like, give rise to the king and queen. Yeah,
that is interesting. Now, how is that received? By the public.
Let's see. The
As opposed to the earlier ones, you know.
The Rosicrucian manifestos provoked much debate in the decades after their publication and were soon used as founding text for the many Rosicrucian societies that were established following the purported Rosicrucian fraternity of Christian Rosenkreutz. Owing partly to their immense popularity and partly to their enigmatic contents, the manifestos have been the object of numerous investigations of the intervening centuries. I think, you know, people just saw them as being saw that as being allegorical and not like, but you know, like,
this is a highly
fair enough, like,
that is not to be taken literally.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like, on the other hand, like, people getting like beheaded, like, was not like on the eve of the like the 30 Years War, like, you know,
it was a way to execute people back then.
Like, I mean, it's still a way to execute people in some places, but like the but
as part of the wedding, they have to cut people's heads off and use them in a ritual. Like, that's like,
well, yeah, I mean, but I mean, it might not have been quite as shocking. It kind of reminds me of like the Green Knight, you know, who like kind of continually resurrects himself, but like or that story, the Gawain and the Green Knight, you know, that you know, Arthurian story. Yeah. There was a movie about it recently with Dev Patel in it. And I think you know, you see that, but yeah, like, he gets his head cut off and he's fine, you know. But as Griffin 15 in the chat knows, Griffin mystics love beheadings, and he says John the Baptist vibes, right? You know, the that was still chant prophecies, they say sometimes. But
I guess so, yeah.
But I mean, I guess it does have like kind of
this narrative.
I mean, yeah, I think that's like the appeal of it. It's like, it's kind that's like the Q drop element is like, the more ambiguous the better, and the richer like it is, and like the more like open to interpretation it is. So this becomes like the key to the like possible like authorship of these manifestos in general. Like, people like generally connect the authorship of all the manifestos to like this one guy and his teacher. His name was Andrei. I hope I'm saying this right. I didn't look to make sure how it should be pronounced. His full name was Johann Valentin Andrei, and he wrote it at age.
Andrei.
Yeah. And he wrote it at age 19, but he later like kind of disowned it. He like didn't, or he wrote The Chemical Wedding at least at age 19.
So it really was a 4chan shit poster, basically.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah,
like
exactly. He was like,
it's just a kid in a basement. No way, but it was a 19-year-old.
Yeah, and it does seem to have been like there is reason to think it was him because like his sort of mentor Hess, I think.
Tobias Hess. Yeah.
Tobias Hess. Yeah. Okay. Tobias Hess. He like was said to have like a copy of like the Fama like before its publication. Like there's letters saying like, oh, I think, because these manifestos before they were officially published, they circulated among certain people. And like there's a bunch of letters mentioning that like Hess is a copy of it, So it seems like, according at least De Vries speculates that Andrei seems to be the most likely candidate, not only of the Confessio, but also the Fama. In addition to the Chemical Wedding, which he claims to have written. But yeah, he says like, he characterized the Chemical Wedding as a joke. He always laughed at the Rosicrucian fable and had chastised the little brother for their curiosity.
Interesting.
Yeah. He was like kind of upset like that, people took it so seriously. I guess like if you write something when you're 19, you then like are liable as you get older to be like, I wish people would stop making.
Disavow. Yeah. Like I was a stupid kid back then. Come on.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples of that. It's like Reza Nagarastani Encyclopedia. I mean, he wasn't 19 when he wrote that either, but just like a little bit, just a little bit younger. What are some other? I'm trying to think of other examples. People like
like Vice before like 2012 or something. It's like, oops, we were like, sorry for not Gavin McInnes himself, but the other people that stayed on who kind of like libbed.
Although in their case, like I don't even know if they're sincere. So
yeah,
like,
no, it's true.
I don't know if this
sincerity.
Like this guy maybe was sincere because he did write. I mean, like the evidence that he wrote it like does seem like fairly strong. So like, I mean, otherwise I would say like, oh, maybe he was just claiming to take credit for it so that he could discredit it. But it does seem like plausible based on like, the connections with Hess, the letters and things like that, that he may have written it. Yeah.
But there are like group authorship kind of theories about these manifestos, right?
I mean, there's other authorship theories for sure.
Yeah.
Now I think like consensus is kind of like gravitating towards this guy, but based on the evidence that we currently have. But like in the past, there's been like a ton of people that were claimed to have written it, like even Francis Bacon himself,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm reading, I guess The Invisible History of the Rosicrucians was 2010. So there might be.
I mean, that guy I feel like has a reason like to not believe that this guy was the author.
You think so? He would be more pro committee. Or
he would definitely
there was
be
a kind of
committee.
Group that was doing it because then it kind of makes you feel like
isn't he like a modern day Rosicrucian?
No, I don't think this guy is like an academic. Tobias Churton, who wrote this book, that's different than the summary I was reading from earlier. That guy was like a modern Rosicrucian. This guy is like an academic, or like adjacent to that. He definitely seems to be like, he's fascinated by the Rosicrucians and blah 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 and like but I'm looking through his section about like who wrote it, and he names those two main people and then also throws out like maybe 10 other names. There's like kind of a milieu with Andrei, Tobias Hess, Abraham Holzel, Christoph Besold, Tobias Adami, Wilhelm von der Wense, Anton Frey, Wilhelm Beidenbach, Christoph Welling, Wilhelm Schickard, Samuel Hafenreffers, Thomas Lanz, and Johannes Stoffel. And I guess, they were in, what was the town they were in generally? It was, it started with a T. Tübingen. Tübingen was where I think a lot of them were based, like Hess and Andrea were based. Besold was the chair of jurisprudence at Tübingen, and was a close friend of Andrea. After Andrea had become intimate with Hess, Besold let Andrea use his amazing library, which would become the foundation of Salzburg University Library, containing the books of Andrea and Hess and several copies of the Fama Fraternitatis. Besold and Andrea shared a love for Christian mysticism, hermetic and alchemical symbolism, and a concern for the Christian church and society, as well as an informed fascination with astronomical and technical knowledge from Arabic sources. They were all clever and learned men. So, yeah, but then I think he, what he does say here, though, that, like, okay, all these people had kind of like overlapping interests and they were friends, but he says what seems to have happened is that researchers have been unable to resist trying to find an actual fraternity RC. If you cannot find the fraternity, at least locate its real mirror in its creators. In other words, the creators must also constitute some kind of group or fraternity, if only of concerted shared interests. But anyone who has studied coolly the material currently available to scholarship soon realizes, perhaps to his annoyance, that the evidence for this does not really add up. It has to be forced to add up. The evidence is circumstantial. In spite of disconcerting facts, scholars have nonetheless been tempted by the idea of a, quote, Hess circle, which, enemy calumny aside, is a neutral idea, and have proceeded thence to the fantasy. Here are two examples of data used in support of group authorship of the so-called manifestos. Melchior Brailer, from Fulda in Buchau, physician to Duke August of Wolfenbüttel, wrote in his book Mysterium Inquitatis Pseudo-Evangelicae, The Mystery of the Hateful False Evangelist, of three eminent men behind the Fama Fraternitatis. The purpose of their writing was apparently to discover the philosopher's stone as a means to healing the ills of the time. From references to Andrea's work Spirit of the Sheathed Sword from 1616, which claimed to include the religious thoughts of Tobias Hess, but was written by Andrea, and its reference to Amicus Noster Dominus Besold, our friend Master Besold, Gottfried Arnold, in his impartial history of the churches and heresies, concluded that Brailer's three eminent authors were Andrea, Hess, and Besold. It's interesting that Brailer was a devotee of the spiritual Christian works of Johann Arndt, since according to Will Erich Peukert, it was Johann Arndt himself who told Christoph Hirsch, a Rosicrucian writer, that 30 people were involved in the creation of the Fama. Since Arndt was Brailer's friend, why did he not tell Brailer this? Etc. He kind of like goes through, he doesn't quite buy this. He doesn't quite buy that, like,
right. Yeah, I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, one thing that we forgot, like, two things about like the manifestos that like we should mention, or that like it's interesting. Like, people say like, oh, okay, well, why would this guy who wrote these things like ridicule alchemy? And like, but this is like an important thing that we haven't quite noted, which is that like it's a weird kind of pivot that happens almost, and it has maybe to do with like the political concerns, but like the like Fama definitely like kind of like shades like the traditional idea of alchemy as like trying to create gold from nothing. Like it kind of, and this is like an important thing like that, even now, like nowadays, like if anyone ever talks about like the philosopher's stone, it's like a sort of a typical thing to note that like, really the philosopher's stone is like enlightenment or immortality or some kind, like it's not really about like turning lead into gold. It's about like refining the spirit. That idea is like a very heavy emphasis of and influence of the Fama, like that, like they like both documents, the Confessio and the Fama. The Confessio kind of walks it back a little bit and says like, hey, like, making gold is okay, but like it's not the most important, because I feel like in that one there's a little bit of a heavier emphasis on like, what can we do for like maybe a prince who like wants to like be an occult monarch or whatever. But
I just had a disturbing thought though. In like, if you zoom out far enough, just think of like, I don't know, like I think of the kind of satanic irony of like a spirit being or something coming and being like, I can show you how to turn lead into gold. And in like a literal sense, like of what alchemy was understood to be, like that's not real. You can't do that. But if you think about colonialism and conquest, like were bullets made with lead back then? Around this time is when, guns became a thing and cannonballs. Like,
I'm not sure what guns were made out of, but yeah, like
turning lead into gold by going places and killing people and like stealing all their land and like their resources and stealing all the gold. Like, in a way, they did figure out a way to turn lead into gold, but like in a disturbing, like less direct route than, just some magic little ceremony. But like and it was because of the alchemical shift in the mindset of, these rulers in Europe that allowed them to turn lead in. Like, so in a way, if you're stretching like the meaning of like alchemy, or its literal realness a little bit broadly, like in a way, these ideas led to them finding a way to turn lead into gold. And that's what the colonization and the genocides of the New World were.
Like that is like one way to like, take it for sure. Like, I feel like that is like and it's also like how a lot of people perceived it. Like they basically like saw this as like, they definitely saw like a lot of people saw a satanic hand in this like immediately.
Oh yeah,
and like like it's the temptation to like I can see why they did. There is something.
I don't even mean to like have to. You don't even have to throw like a djinn or like the devil into it, but just like these like magi that are like, I have the secret wisdom. Like in just thinking about these advisors, to like the great rulers. Like, just on that sense. They like, taught them the secret, didn't they?
Well, if you go back to like Paracelsus, who was like a huge, sorry to interrupt you. I know we always do the crosstalk, but he like one of his like big points is that like man has to know what the devil knows. Like we have to like he said that like explicitly, like we should study like the devil's arts so that like we can like use it and like use it for good, which is like a sus idea. Like, but or like a not
certainly
like
I mean,
he put it in those terms. Like he wasn't saying like we should learn hacking science and then like a bunch of like religious fools were like you're being blasphemous. Like no, he was like we should like study Satan and use Satan.
Master the Devil's Workshop.
Yeah, exactly.
The tools of the devil.
Yeah, we had to beat him using his own
it doesn't
game,
even
basically.
sound. Yeah, I guess it's like maybe it's like, oh, know your enemy and like learn.
That's kind of
so
exactly like
them,
know your enemy. Yeah, let me see if I can find the quote because I have it in our notes from like the from a while ago. But if I search devil in our workflowy, it's going to come up so many times.
It's one thing to know the devil's ways to like solely defend against them. But like also like to learn how to practice the devil's way. That's a little extra step, in terms of
right. He says this is from I can't actually give the citation, but I'll read this. This is from a book I was reading I guess around a year ago at this time. While much of what Paracelsus explores seems utterly rational, if not obvious, to contemporary minds in a pharmaceutical-rich world, he also engaged deeply with theology, mysticism, and superstition. In his examination of St. Vitus's dance, a condition marked by an uncontrollable jerking and trembling of limbs, now called Sydenham's chorea, Paracelsus referred to it as an imaginative sickness, for which he recommended treatments that ran from abstinence and fasting to the destruction of a poppet doll created in the victim's likeness.
Oh my God.
Which would likewise destroy the roots of the sickness. For Paracelsus, mastering chemical as well as magical careers were crucial to understanding illness and wellness. It was also a matter of Christian duty. He felt, quote, I don't know if it's a quote from him or another work, but it says, human beings needed to know what the devil knew, including the kind of knowledge the devil misapplied. And this is a quote from him. If we can learn from the devil his entire art, we should do so, thereby making use of his magical art and leaving the devil alone.
Use the devil's
not
art and then leave him alone.
Yeah, not good. Exactly. Like we should learn the devil's entire magical art, and then we won't have to depend on him anymore once we know everything that he can teach us.
Right. It sounds like the opposite. Like you will
not like the best reasoning.
Devilish ways to some degree.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. A little.
Not a great way to defend yourself from accusations of being a devil worshiper either.
Right,
If someone's like, I don't know, Paracelsus, this is seeming kind of satanic and sus. It's well, we should learn everything that the devil knows, and then once we've done that, we won't need him anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, easier said than done.
It's kind of
just do a little devil shit as a treat, and then you can get on it.
Yeah. So you can kind of see why, even though some of their opponents were totally insane in their own right, if not more so, you can kind of see what they what their their complaints weren't totally without grounding. But
absolutely.
But yeah, I wanted to note that Andre went on to write another work called Christianopolis, which seems basically to be kind of a revision of this whole idea, right? He says there has been published striking evidence of a certain fraternity, which in my opinion is a joke. It would be superfluous to say what commotion among people followed the fama of this matter, what conflict of minds, what disturbance and gesturing of impostors and swindlers. Many indeed were deceived by the fama. And in his autobiographical work, this is, the writer, lastly, in which he had already characterized his chemical wedding as a joke, Andre stated that he has always laughed at the Rosicrucian fable and chastised his little brothers for their curiosity.
Oh, yeah, right.
Among
actually,
those
call it. Hold up.
Yeah.
I'm just going to grab some water, take a little break real quick for 90 seconds. I'll be right back.
Sure, yeah. Okay, word. Yeah, word. Oh, okay. I'm watching the stream and I realized that I thought he was going to put up a thing, but I guess he is. I'm just going to keep reading this, I guess. Okay, so, yeah. What was I going to say? Yeah, so this is just a little description of Christianopolis. This guy's at their book. The Christian Neapolitans studied God specifically in the second lecture theater of metaphysics and theosophy. That is lowercase t theosophy. So this is the other thing I kind of learned actually in this process, that you had this whole phenomenon of bohemian and early modern quote unquote theosophy. I mean, obviously it makes sense, but I learned a bit more about it. Anyway, so yeah, by theosophy, not to be confused with Helena Blavatsky's capital T theosophy. This is just knowledge of God, right? So so they studied God in the second lecture theater of metaphysics and theosophy, and the divine secrets they were taught there agree with the ideas expressed in the manifestos. In the second lecture theater, the wonders of God were studied, about which the stranger who's visiting Christianopolis, how foolish we are that we prefer Aristotle to ourselves, that we embrace that little man instead of the marvels of God, which put him to shame, and which thereby shame the entire scholastic university enterprise. In metaphysics, the citizens lifted themselves up to the primum ens, the first being, God. In theosophy, they were instructed by God himself, where nature ends, here, that is theosophy begins. And taught by the supreme divinity, it religiously guards its mysteries. The students of theosophy could rise up, free themselves from worldly attachments, and come closer to God, who revealed himself not just through his word, but in manifold ways. So, you can kind of see how it makes sense that this guy, was the writer of the chemical wedding, but then he kind of wanted to improve upon this idea in this notion of Christianopolis. And if you look at Christianopolis, there's also this kind of academic hierarchy to it. That guy Luc de Vries describes it, or Lika de Vries, I don't know, describes it pretty well. Let me see if I can find the relevant part. It's in his chapter 3. He talks about how this is where Dimitri would be vamping for me. But yeah. So the hierarchical. This is a yeah. So he talks about like this whole hierarchy of a society. Like at its head could be found a German leader, which we now know is supposed to be Duke August II, a most illustrious man whose secret council consisted of one fellow of German origin from each of the 12 faculties, right? And there are these, different faculties that he has. Yeah, this is actually like, he actually calls like the, oh, sorry, this is a different work of his. It's called Invitation to something. But his Menipus is Turbo. Couple of different things he critiqued, like kind of the academic establishment and the religious establishment. But yeah, and that like, because everything was kind of like Socratic and based on disputation and dubitation. And he was like, that's all satanic, right? Because Satan is the great adversary, right?
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that adversarial system. So yeah, he critiqued that and thought it should be based on something else. I don't know what else it would be based on. I feel like discourse is almost inherently kind of like dialectical, but
right.
I guess he wanted it to just be based on like lifting yourself up to God and God just telling you everything directly, or like contemplating. I don't know.
He wasn't willing to debate. He would not debate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I won't debate.
He would not be successful in today's world.
Yeah. It's not clear like yeah, so right, we talked about what happens in the lecture theater. Blah blah blah. Some citizens of Christianopolis dedicated their entire lives to the practice of alchemy.
Right.
But Christianopolis' foremost objective was not the creation of the philosopher's stone or of gold, but the study of the world. Same thing. Mm-hmm. Alchemy in Christianopolis was practiced in order to investigate all aspects of creation experimentally, including the animal, vegetable, and mineral worlds. In the alchemical laboratory, the workers learned to master fire, to employ air, to estimate water, and to test the earth. Again, sounds exactly like what Descartes said, right? That series of the elements, right? But anyway,
kind of understand everything so that you can like exploit it. And that is just like a huge European idea.
But also that just like that exact same language is so similar, right? Yeah. Like, master fire, master air, master water, master earth.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of his, it illuminates, I guess this guy's argument is that it illuminates the idea like of how maybe this ideal Rosicrucian society might be organized. But yeah, I mean, another, I don't know if you had something that you wanted to say, Dimitri. Welcome back. Sorry, I've just been kind of going while you were gone.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I guess. Well, let's talk.
My face is kind of cut off.
Maybe we'll talk through a little more about like the impact. And there are these 3 treatises, like stories, publications that came out, right?
Yeah.
And then the activity stopped. Like, when did it stop? Because it did, right? Like abruptly.
Yeah.
Like right after.
Yeah, right after a chemical wedding. Yeah. Well, that was like the last thing that was written.
Okay.
So after that, yeah.
Yeah, maybe this is. It's an interesting time because I mean, I think like the author I was reading from earlier says that that Hess and the other guy are like he thinks are the author. He thinks it's indisputable that they partnered with each other and they wrote all these things.
Right. Yeah.
The question is like, were they just doing this on their own, or were they a part of something bigger? Because of course, like there was a lot of intrigue and rivalry and war going on at this time between the Protestant states and the Catholic ones. I had found the interesting that academic paper resisting the Rosicrucians, theories on the occult origins of the 30 Years' War.
This is interesting because this is also like, kind of what you just said is like sort of the theory of Francis Yates. And like this is like directly like a response to Yates. Like, it calls out Yates for being wrong about certain things, but it also talks about 2 people who sort of had like Yates's conspiratorial like take on the Rosicrucians. Like, you know, Yates like obviously was important and like was largely like correct in the generalities, like if not the specifics, about the importance of like esotericism, hermeticism, and the occult, and like the early modern period and like the Renaissance, and later the quote unquote like in the quote unquote Renaissance. But you know, a lot of the specifics were wrong. And she didn't mention these two guys, even though they kind of actually have like a similar take to her on how this all happened. So yeah, like he highlights two guys, Foreigner, who I mentioned a little bit before, and Boucher, Jean Boucher, who's French.
And these were like Catholic critics, basically, of like Rosicrucianism and honestly like Calvinism. But you get a sense of like how it's slotted into the political discourse of that time and that like war period. Let me see here. There's a lot of good stuff. I want to see. Libavius, Jesuit scholar Jacob Gretzer. Responding to the first two essays. Here we go. Friedrich Ferner. So maybe I'll read the intro though, because it kind of catches you up on Yates is like probably Francis Yates's book from the 70s is like very well known, but a lot of people have like issued corrections. But I've also read a lot of stuff of like, you know, like basically not to like throw out her stuff, because like she brings up an interesting conceptual framework of like thinking about these like conspiracies that were going on that, you know, perhaps shouldn't be just like tossed out.
Or like really like her big insight is that like these like, because for a long time, like the idea of like the influence of secret societies or like the occult or like esotericism, like it was like kind of marginalized like as a subject of like serious study. And also like it like its importance like in the intellectual history of like, you know, Europe and like these periods in particular, like what a huge force it was like in, you know, intellectual cultures, was like really understated. And that was the big thing. It wasn't like the conspiratorial angle is where she kind of falls apart, but like you know,
stating reminding people about like John Dee and figures like that I think a lot of people refer back to her book as like, oh, like Queen Elizabeth had like a sorcerer, you know what I mean? Like it's like kind of a thing of like, oh, this people really took this seriously, and this is like an aspect of history that we have to consider, and not just
it's like inextricable from like intellectual culture more broad, like, you know, like that's kind of where you get like this kind of like Whiggish thing where like these like, you know, you have like your sort of protagonists, your intellectual protagonists who like are kind of shorn of these like unsightly aspects to their thought, you know, like for instance, like to say that like, you know, Descartes had like occult, you know, ideas or influence, or like, you know, Sir Isaac Newton is another example. We were talking about him before, like with the like the 7 colors of the rainbow. Like that's like, we're not taught that in school, you know, like we're not taught that like he was like a deeply interested in the occult and alchemy, you know, and that like it was like it's just indistinguishable from his other work. It was most of his career was in that area, you know. But like
exactly, you know, rocketry being like, you know, developed in America by a Crowleyite, you know, that it's just like, I mean, they just don't talk about him at all. But kind of a thing like that of like, oh, it can't be serious, like stop it, you know, like the Beatles would say, I gotta admit, it's getting better all the time.
It's a marginal phenomenon, and like it was exactly kind of like you know, today, like we back project, like today, like you think of like someone who is like a Rosicrucian. You think of like a cultist who's like kind of weird and like, you know, holding a sword in a room with like this big sort of like colorful tapestry or whatever, and wearing like a purple robe and you know, doing this weird stuff. It just like seems like some kind of like, like a sectarian religion. But like really like they were part of, in a big way, like the sort of religious conversation, the scientific conversation, and like the broader cultural conversation that was happening during this period. Like they weren't like this weird group in the way that like, you know, we think of modern Rosicrucians as being.
Right. They're kind of like intelligentsia, you know, like
Yeah.
oftentimes attached to the courts of like the rulers who would like, you know, love to have them around and talk about all these crazy ideas and power, you know, and things like that. Like they and like we said earlier, like there was no like brick wall separating like the hard sciences and like alchemy and the quote unquote mysticism and like religion and all these things. Like these are all the important subjects that a smart person would know about, you know.
In terms of what like Griffin 15 says, like even if there wasn't a formal brotherhood, I do think a milieu theory makes sense. I mean, yeah, like that's indisputably true that like people read this and they saw like the idea as being in the same way that like they would read something like Christianopolis and like understand that it was fictional, you know. Like that's the thing, like in this sort of Rosicrucian manifestos, it's like the sort of line between fact and fiction is ambiguous, right? And like there's this idea like, oh, there might have been that real brotherhood out there. But even if like it was published as like, this is a fake story, attention everyone, here's an interesting story that I made up, like it could still be inspirational, and it was like to many.
Look at
right?
Lord
Like
of the Rings.
exactly like Lord of the
Literally.
Rings.
Yeah. So let me just read the intro from this one paper. It gives you a sense of where they're going with it. They say one of the most curious events in Reformation history was the sudden appearance of the Rosicrucian manifestos. In 1614 and 15, two pamphlets were published in Kassel purporting to describe the workings and mission of a secret society, the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross. The RC Brotherhood, as presented in the pamphlets, represented an alternative to the Jesuit order, offering the means for a, quote, universal and general reformation that would complete the work begun by Protestants in the 16th century. This reformation, moreover, would not merely be spiritual, but bring together all of the arts and sciences, natural philosophy, and theology. In the English-speaking world, the best-known work on the topic remains Francis Yates' The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. Yates argued that the manifestos could only be understood in the context of the marriage between Princess Elizabeth, daughter of James I of England, and Frederick V, the Palatine Elector. For Calvinists, as well as supporters of occultist philosophy such as John Dee, Michael Meyer, Francis Bacon, and others, the marriage was not only a supreme political match, but also one which brought together forward-thinking scholars from both sides of the Channel. Ultimately, the promised reformation that was to have proceeded from this marriage did not materialize, a casualty of the 30 Years' War, the exile and disgrace of Frederick and Elizabeth, and the, quote, witch hunts directed against practitioners of what Yates has termed the occult philosophy. In the aftermath of the war, scientists and theologians learned to suppress their occult leanings. The heirs of the Rosicrucians were the members of the Royal Society, respectable scientists who denied their older interests in alchemy and astrology in favor of a version of science which was entirely secular. The Rosicrucian Enlightenment has not enjoyed universal acclamation. In a particularly critical review, Brian Vickers described the book as a triumph of rhetoric over evidence, concluding that her argument is an edifice built not on rock or sand, but on air, etc. Yates argued that the Rosicrucians derived from Christian Kabbalism of the sort associated with Georgi, and to a lesser extent, Reuchlin. The Messianic movement of Rosicrucianism had its origins in the court occultism of Elizabethan England, finding its grandest expression in the, quote, scientific British imperialism of John Dee. Dee's variety of esoteric thought, according to Yates, found fertile ground in the court of the Palatinate. That word always fucks me up. The Palatinate. You know, it looks like Emperor Palpatine.
Palatinate. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
A Palatine, Palatinate. The Rosicrucian manifestos, then, represented the, quote, export of Elizabethan occult philosophy to Germany, with the royal wedding as the outward and visible sign of the reception of this new culture. No. But as R.J.W. Evans and others have shown, Yates seriously overstated the role of John Dee, whose influence on German occultism was belated and fairly minor. And while her theory connecting the appearance of the Rosicrucian manifestos to the wedding of Frederick V to the Princess Elizabeth is an attractive one, it nevertheless presents grave obstacles. Robin Barnes has argued that Yates seriously exaggerates the political aspect of the Rosicrucian, quote, movement. What we know about the origins of Rosicrucianism makes it difficult to associate, as Yates did, the Rosicrucian movement with Calvinism. The known supporters of the movement were almost all Orthodox Lutherans, and parallels between the Rosicrucians and other learned societies in Germany have been demonstrated. That some apocalyptically minded Lutherans looked to the Palatine Elector as a leader in their struggle against the Habsburgs had less to do with the elector's intellectual virtues than with the fact that the Saxon Elector, historically the focal point of Lutheran political loyalty, refused to play the part assigned to him by the radicals. The idea that a common passion for the occult drew together England, the Palatinate, and German Lutherans on the eve of the 30 Years' War appears, on close examination, to be far less likely than Yeats would have wanted us to think. The speculative nature of so much of the argument ensures that the Rosicrucian Enlightenment must remain, as Charles Nauert suggested, a book in the subjective mode. No one has ever doubted Dame Yates's erudition. Likewise, her occasional carelessness with sources is well known. Ultimately, as a scholar, she was perhaps better at posing questions than answering them. Methodological lapses aside, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment does raise a number of questions that remain to be thoroughly examined. That there was no international movement in the way Yeats imagined we shall, for the moment, take as a given. Our goal here is to re-examine the political implications of the Rosicrucian movement as it was seen by contemporaries. Close examination of polemics written against the Rosicrucians, some that Yeats had read as well as some she had not, indicate that at least some authors of the early 17th century perceived a Rosicrucian movement connecting England and the Calvinist rebellion in Germany. These texts reveal, moreover, an argument over political theory that struck at the very heart of the Renaissance conception of monarchy. The debate over the Rosicrucians reopened older questions about popular resistance and popular sovereignty, which had, in Germany at least, laid dormant since the great peasant uprisings of the 1520s. The response of some Catholic divines to the Rosicrucian manifestos reveals a conception of religious and political reform at least as radical as that attributed to their imagined Rosicrucian opponents. Yeah, interesting. So, yeah, I guess like Yeats did not mention these two figures that he discovered and like quotes from.
Exactly. Yeah, she was like she used like a worse example that she was wrong about. But like these guys actually did like, you know, have the kind of Yeats like conception of the whole situation.
Right. I think Ferner was one of them, right?
Yeah. Foreigner. I'm not sure if you pronounce the O with the umlaut.
I think it's kind of an like a soft Ferner. Yeah, instead of foreigner. So let me see. Where's the treatise that he wrote? Let me go up here. Friedrich Ferner.
This is like an important thing from this article. Like, you know, I mean, I feel like we've kind of hit this point before, but like, you know, I think that he put this pretty well. There were distinct political implications to the occult movements of the later 16th century. They reflected an ambitious mentality, which sought to find unity in the chaos of a religiously divided world. As Bruce Moran has noted, the Philosophia Hermetica constituted an official court philosophy in much of Germany, as you said. Occult science offered the image of a unified creation, in which each part reflected the whole of the cosmos. Within that scheme, the monarch increasingly was perceived as the source, the genesis of earthly and heavenly harmony. The essential connection between macrocosm and microcosm assumed that the manipulation of the parts might bring about a transformation of the whole. When adapted to the political context, the relationship between microcosm and macrocosm offered precisely the right sort of analogy for German princes seeking to justify personal claims to individual authority within the political universe of the Holy Roman Empire. So also, like, you know, you can draw like a huge like connection between that and like the Leviathan, right? Like that famous picture, right, that we've all seen of like the king's body being made up of like all the people, right? Like this same like idea like is like, you know, there's a huge like parallel, right? Like this idea of microcosm versus macrocosm. Like
right. The leader embodies like all the people.
Yeah. Like everyone's seen like you know, Hobbes's Leviathan, like that famous like picture, you know.
Hobbes
like
I actually haven't.
If you like search Hobbes Leviathan, it should come up like in like the first picture, and then you're
I've
gonna
seen
recognize
this. I've seen this picture.
Yeah. I knew you'd seen it. Yeah. Right. So yeah. I'd almost share a screen, but yeah, like I know everyone probably has seen it before. Yeah. Don't even try to mess with it, given how bad the stream is. But yeah, you know, so yeah, you can see the parallels there for sure.
Yeah. definitely. And let me see here. So there was let's see, it does say the some of the German princes, like, they were kind of taking this the Rosicrucian revelations as an excuse to act up a little bit. They do bring up, like, the comparison some people made to, like, the Cathars and the Albigensians, right? I like both in terms of, like, what the Rosicrucians were after, and also, like, what Calvinists were allegedly up to. That, like, this is another heretical kind of, like, upsurge of the same Albigensian heresy that was in France, that I think we talked about in our, like, Holy Grail, like, Otto Rahn episode, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, we definitely read about them.
The Cathars we talked about in that episode. Yeah.
And the Munster uprising and, like, peasant rebellions, and then also
basically like that was, like, the key thing in, like, Lutheran and Catholic reactions to the manifestos, like, that were critical. They basically, like, those that is, like, the key element that, like, links them both, that, like, there's something that, like, that is connected between, like, pan-sophism and, like, radical sectarianism, basically. Like, this guy says the general consensus was that there was something of the demonic in the more extreme claims of both sectarian enthusiasts and learned occultism. So a
lot of people saw the devil in it. It was yes, I think,
but in both of those things, that, like, the devil is, like, inspiring these revolts, like these peasants uprising, like Thomas Munzer with a Z, like, his thing. He talks this guy. Sorry, what are you gonna say?
I just want to read Libavius's critique of that, because it's pretty good. And he was one of the first authors to make a direct comparison between the Rosicrucians and the radical sectarians. And this is Andreas Libavius of Coburg. He wrote, I guess a Substack post in 1616 containing a sharp rebuke of the Fama, which rests on his long argument against the Paracelsians. What Libavius found most distressing among the Paracelsians, and by extension the Rosicrucians, was their muddle-headedness. This is interesting. His goal was to establish a clarity of language and cleanse alchemy of its more speculative mystical trappings. The Paracelsians, in his view, did the opposite, muddying the solution by adding sorts of eclectic spiritual and philosophical claims into the mix. The, quote, clever and sot-witted Paracelsians latch on to whatever ideas come into their skull, quote, so-called Kabbalistic, magic, microcosmic, macrocosmic, etc. Their writings are so confused and obscure, no one could possibly make any sense of them. Delving into the tangled jungle of Rosicrucian thought, he finds several genuinely disturbing aspects. It would seem that to be a member of the order, one would have to be a mathematician, an alchemist, a Kabbalist, a magus, and skilled in, quote, necromancy, chiromancy, and other Paracelsian arts. The powers Rosicrucians claim to have defy credulity. How could the society remain hidden for so long? How would members travel to the meetings unless they flew there, like Tannhauser to the Venusberg? To Libavius's ears, the meetings of the society sounded like the witches' Sabbath, and its members like witches. Their, quote, general reformation thus seemed to be rooted in superstition, Kabbalism, heresy, and the demonic. Libavius associates the Rosicrucian movement with Calvinism on several occasions, but he's more consistent in stressing the linkages between Rosicrucians and Anabaptists. Certain concepts of the General Reformation approach those of the Anabaptists, he says. In particular, their stress on achieving purity in this world. They reject the authority of Scripture, preferring their own, quote, oracles and mystical visions. In this sense, they are like the Magi of old, but also pretend to a, quote, godly face, like the false prophets, Anabaptists, and capital E enthusiasts. I guess that was another sect.
Yeah. Well, it was like a thing, like
kind of like a charismatic movement.
Sort of. Like being, it was almost more of like a political thing, but like being inspired. I mean, I guess you can't. It's hard to distinguish the two, but like charismatic, you could say.
He says he expresses his fear that this projected general reformation of all arts according to the skill of the Magi could result in a, quote, great disturbance among the among the peasantry, a Munsterish uprising. So there we go, like the fear about peasant revolts. The Rosicrucian Reformation is a Paracelsian fantasy whose ultimate source is not God or scripture by the Father and founder of all lies and false prophets, the devil. The apocalyptic prophecies of the Rosicrucians are no different than those of Munzer and the Anabaptists. For decades, predictions of the world's end had been floating about. The apocalypse was to have come in 1572, 1593, and various other years. These Paracelsian prophets think themselves wiser than Daniel, but ultimately all of their prognostications are foolish fantasies and, quote, devilish pasquinades. For Libavius,
I love that.
Yeah, that's good. For Libavius, the real danger lies in the simultaneous promise of spiritual and worldly gain, the mixing of a spiritualist message with promises of material gain. Fair point, don't you think? I mean, yeah. The Rosicrucian Enlightenment, quote unquote, is nothing other than carnality in the guise of spirituality. At the root of Paracelsian dreams of a worldly paradise was precisely the sort of thinking that could stir the mob to popular rebellion. Interesting. So, you know, almost making them sound good because he's so afraid of like a workers' uprising. But nonetheless, I think he does make some points that what he's critiquing. I mean, it's funny. You could think of it both ways, right? On the one hand, you could classify, say, you know, socialism is a philosophy of like getting material gain in this world. But you could equally say that about capitalism and even like Protestant, the very Protestant Northern European versions of capitalism, you know, that would dominate and spread around the world. Right but I think those things are not exactly the same. Like, you know,
well, it is like a common critique of Marxism, which like is not like totally like unfounded, that like, but is also like significantly unfounded in other ways. But that like the immanentize the eschaton thing,
right,
you know,
right.
Which like, okay, yeah, like obviously you don't want to have this sort of like utopianism necessarily, like, you know, you don't want to be thinking about like immanentizing the eschaton, bringing about like necessarily a paradise on earth, but like at what point do you distinguish between that and like trying to improve the world at all, you know, like
right.
It's like,
it's people should be allowed to want to improve the world.
It's
and
a blurry like distinction, you know,
gain.
if you're like saying like, oh hey, like you want to like, you know, say like change society at all, like that's like, you know, trying to like, you should just wait and like for things to be good in heaven and like be obedient, like, you know, to whatever, like our institution. And then like, you know, otherwise you're trying to get like world. It's like, well, you have like worldly gain, like, you know how to read, like shit like that, you know, like,
you could go to crazy extremes with that kind of idea of like, like seeking material gain in this life is just bad. That's sinful, you know, or the flip side, like throw everything, you know, like Christians could say, like, you know, like don't do anything in this world, just wait for heaven, you know, which also can be like cope to like tell you to not change your circumstances when you're being exploited and stuff. I think, you know, the end goal of like where the wealth gets shared is definitely critical in that. But I will say,
like, I think that like, for instance, like you could say like, okay, like it is. Well, honestly, like, you know, I feel like my knowledge of like Christian but I feel like it's fair to say like at least in the present day, like Catholic social teaching is that like you should like share the wealth with, even though they, I guess, don't do that and they like hoard a bunch of like treasures and stuff. Like in general, like, you know, you're supposed to give charity and like help the poor, right? And like, you know, you're not like extreme wealth inequality is like opposed by like Catholic social teaching as currently defined, and I assume that is like based, so like that like isn't like equivalent to like trying to, I think like to steel man this idea would be to say like that what really they're opposed to, which is like a reasonable thing to oppose, is like the like political dimension of it, where like, because like, you know, some insane things did happen in some of those revolts, you know, like, you know, like whatever you make of their,
they
like,
were not well organized like proletarian uprisings to like establish a workers' state.
And if like, you know, they were not, and you could end up with yeah, like, and you know, if you go by like the sort of political program of some of this stuff, like you might end up with like, yeah, basically like a sorcerer king, like an absolute monarch who's like ruling with like a demonic scepter like over everybody, like, so, and he is like sort of supposed to be like, he's basically playing the role of like the returned Christ, sort of like in that sense of immanentize the eschaton, like, you know, where Christ's 1,000-year reign or whatever the thing is replaced with like, you know, Peter Thiel or Stephen Miller or JD Vance like ruling as a lion, you know.
But I think if you think about shit like that would come, you know, much later in the Western Protestant tradition specifically, like things like, you know, like the prosperity gospel teachings and shit that would proliferate in America eventually.
Yeah.
About like, and even that kind of like, there is that strain of Calvinism that kind of believes that like if you get rich, like, you know, everything that happened is like already God's plan. You can't actually change it. So if you get rich, it's like kind of like confirmation that God wanted you to be rich. And if you're not, then it means you suck. Like there's this weird kind of, it almost like forces you to go out and do well, so then you can like point at yourself and be like, yeah, God must love me, huh? You know, instead of like normally like the message of the Gospels, which is like rich people are sus. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it cleverly flips it around so that you could, and you know, I think most people maybe wouldn't associate like esoteric kind of new age kind of thought with like getting rich, but I don't know, just look at Silicon Valley and how new age saturated the ethos
I
of
actually
that
think
place
that
was.
new age thought is like very much about getting rich. Like no
gurus.
like no new age thought is like a really I feel like that's like a really defining element of, it's very like, it's oriented very much like towards this world, and there isn't like a significant like aesthetic dimension to a lot of like, you know, new age in general. Like obviously there, like this is a whole big umbrella, but if you think about it, like, and yeah, you're right, you have these sort of extreme cults where like the members are like immiserated and like the guru does whatever they want and like they have to like eat paste or who knows like what. But generally, like if you think about like new age stuff, is kind of, it's about like for the like, you know, it's like manifesting and like, you know, doing magic. Yeah, exactly. Someone in the chat just said manifesting. Yeah, power positive thinking, the secret. Exactly. It's about like getting worldly rewards through like this sort of self-help religiosity. You know, like it's very, very like world oriented.
Like,
you know,
the
it's not like
therapy thing that like is, you know, proliferated now, and even the earlier kind of like, you know, counterculture, I think like it's often meant as like, you know, it's like a cliche with like ayahuasca. People will be like, I just did like 10 months of therapy in like 6 hours, and it's like, no, you didn't. Like, you know, but like think about the ROI of that. Think about the ROI of that. Like, you know, like you're saving so much money. It's so efficient. You're just getting boop. Oh, like you did some war crimes. Here, like take some Peter Thiel MDMA. Now go to a psytrance rave. You're fine now. Like it's clearly being instrumentalized in this like optimize yourself to become a better like economic actor and like become more of a you know, a hustle boss kind of person, you know, so that you can like grind harder within the capitalist system. That's like,
yeah, it's like the Joseph Campbell like follow your bliss thing. And like no, like I mean, it's interesting to compare like the Rosicrucian idea of the New Age with the other idea of the New Age, and that like you know, with the idea of the New Age that we usually mean when we refer to that like today, like it is really like the, you know, the idea of like obedience and the idea of like, you know, like being oriented towards like an extra worldly objective, like is very much like not a part of like the modern like new age thing. You know, it's all about like the rewards that you can get. Like, and it's kind of like, again, we talked about this a little bit before, like following rules, and except for like maybe following maybe a method, you might say like a Descartesian method or Cartesian method. Sorry, I know it's the official adjective there, but like the, you know, you might follow a method, but you don't necessarily follow like, you know, rules or like strictures usually in like your standard new age, you know, unless you are like, yeah, like in a cult, which like maybe you could call like
High
under the
control
sort of like, or high control group, like you're from Heaven's Gate. I guess you could say
Right.
Heaven's Gate is New Age, and like in that case,
Yeah.
maybe. But
no, there's a lot of self-initiation, like
Yeah.
in the New Age kind of space, especially now with the internet, where you can kind of follow like influencers and like learn things from them, and like you could teach yourself how to meditate hypothetically, like you could do all kinds
Yeah.
of things without necessarily having to like join a group.
Yeah.
And so yeah,
The
there's
Course
a lot
in
of
Miracles, the Seth material, like most of that like sort of stuff, like even Theosophy. Again, like the worst that could happen is like you get in an argument with Helena Blavatsky or something. Like I guess like if you go to like a Waldorf school, like they'd make you like wear certain clothes or like play with gnomes or whatever, I guess, when you're a kid. So there's some of that. I mean, it does run the gamut, but I'd say like overall, like, and again, that can be good or it can like be bad, or it has like a bad elements too. Like one is the sort of cult of like worldliness, materialism, materialism in the sense of like avarice, like covetousness, like consumption by like worldly matters and like acquisition of like things, for oneself, and that I think is bad. And like even the idea that is bad, like kind of has like been like I think lost as like a value, and almost now like because it has to do a lot with like the centrality of capitalism in a way where like capitalism's values kind of like shape everything, and the idea that like getting like getting money like is
securing
like
the bag
is like very much marginalized. But
just reflect on the total collapse of stigma around like quote unquote selling out from like the time we were like kids to like now. Like now that's almost been totally lost. Like the idea of like sticking to like principles and like not doing certain things. It just like if there's a bag there, people take it. It's so normalized now that you almost can't like. It's not even like worth making a critique because it's just seen as absolutely like normal. But I think if I can give Gen X credit for one thing, I feel like they're like their emphasis on like not liking fucking sellouts was like good. I mean, it was like at least like I think
as far as it went, I guess.
It didn't work ultimately, and probably a lot of the people that said that in their 20s like eventually sold out, just like the boomers did, and blah blah blah. But then when you start to get the millennial kind of era, it's like things are like not as good, and then everyone feels pressured to like you can't afford.
I mean,
well,
even just think about how like just think about like how we like talk about music or like assess it. It's like usually not like I don't know, like we certainly wouldn't say like he created the most beautiful, like we might say like him to whatever, like he combined, or he or she combined these like different melodies, like we talk about like it went triple platinum, it sold like this many units or whatever, like that type of thing. Like that's how we like that's those are the most important musicians to us. Like it's not based on like who's innovating the most or like whatever, like Mozart like died in like poverty, like can you like it at total like like he was buried like in a pauper's grave. Like that's insane. Like can you imagine like Taylor Swift dying in a pauper's and being buried in a pauper's grave?
But he got so many Spotify streams, you'd think
exactly. No, he got so many streams, but and yet, I guess he didn't know how to girl boss or, just a like male boss hard enough to, to sell different editions of the life of a composer.
37 editions of life of a
the life of a composer. Anyway, like that's a significant degree. But like the I think that like what I was saying is that like it is bad in some ways. Of course, in other ways, it can be good. Like to have like a the idea that like you want to be obedient. Like if there's like a sort of an institution like the Catholic Church, it's hard for me to think of in terms of my own religiosity, but I feel like I relate to Protestants a bit more because like it's a very different type of thing. like from like Islam and how I think about like religion and my relationship to God. Like, so it's hard for me to relate to like Catholics in this way because like they have this like institution where you have like people who have like official roles and like obedience to God is like connected to like obedience to them, like in a way. And like that to me, like I don't like love as a value, you know. Like I feel like that can be like easy, as we've seen in the case of the Catholic Church time and time again, like very sus and like you know.
Of course, yeah.
So I mean, again, like there, like even before the Protestant Reformation, there was like a tradition of like you know like quote unquote Reformation or like which a lot of these people were drawing on kind of like you know radical ideas, like often that were like kind of tied to like the development of the spirit, like the Imitatio Christi, like the you know that book's pretty famous, like you know that kind of had that tendency to kind of like break away from you know I guess the like the exoteric and like the sort of you know just obedience to this institution. But I don't know, I guess it's kind of like not good if it's like definitional of the religion and like you know but
but I mean, in a way, like like Ferner was kind of an example of a Catholic that was kind of advancing.
Yeah, his argument is maybe like a little bit like clearer. Yeah, so let's
and more nuanced. Yeah.
Yeah, well, he was like a Catholic Reformationist, you know, like so that's like a whole thing where it's like the Reformation wasn't just about like the like Protestantism emerging, like you know, eventually the Catholics, like they were like, oh, we do got to reform a little bit, otherwise, like we're gonna just keep hemorrhaging like countries, and so you know, but then of course there was also the Counter Reformation, but but it's just to say like Reformation wasn't just a Protestant phenomenon, you know.
Right. This guy's kind of a Catholic revisionist, you know. He's not gonna he's not trying to abandon the church, but he wants to like purify it without destroying it, you know, basically. So he's still sussed out by the people that did kind of go, you know, full Trotsky mode and decided to like, we hate you. But anyways, let's see here. He was the suffragan bishop of Bamberg, a man whose primary claim to fame rests on his role as the leader of the witch hunts in the Prince Bishopric of Bamberg. He says his book was written in a period of deep despair, where he felt that only a miracle could save the Habsburg Empire, etc. So let's see. All right. Ferner did not base his argument on a, quote, garbled version of the Rosicrucian manifestos. He appears to have seen the expanded 1617 edition of the Fama, which included short treatises by Georg Molther and Julianus de Campus. The crux of Ferner's argument is that one of the chief causes of the 30 Years' War was that Rosicrucians had infiltrated the highest levels of government, both the imperial court and the courts of the German princes. It was their nefarious influence that had led Rudolf II to issue the Letter of Majesty in 1608, and it was they who had convinced many Lutheran princes to ally with the Calvinists in rebellion against the crown. In other words, Palma Triumphalis, a work Yeats cites but never read, provides potentially the strongest evidence that at least some people in the early 17th century Germany did perceive the Rosicrucian movement as being, quote, attached, to use her word, to the revolt in Bohemia and the web of alliances forged by the Palatine Elector. It's difficult to say what possessed Ferner to latch onto the Rosicrucians in this particular text, although there are some clues. He appears to have been conversant in the Paracelsian controversy of the late 16th century. His patron, Bishop Neithard von Tungen, was a notorious hypochondriac and collector of works on medicine. Works both for and against Paracelsian medicine and alchemy, including Libavius's major work on chemistry, figure prominently in his library. He never cites Libavius's work directly, but he probably knew about him. He says also there was a far more direct Rosicrucian threat in the diocese. In February 1619, a new prophet emerged in Nuremberg. Philip Ziegler traveled to the town of Fürth in the southern part of the Prince Bishopric of Bamberg, proclaiming the coming of the kingdom of Christ, following the language of the Rosicrucian manifestos. He claimed he would complete the Reformation of Christendom and reconcile Christians, Jews, and heathens under a new Davidic kingdom. Over a period of a few weeks, Ziegler attracted a rather large following until he was run out of the territory by diocesan officials. At least on the surface, Ziegler's prophetic peregrination appears similar to that of Hans Hut a century earlier, hence the official's concern was not entirely unreasonable. The Rosicrucian question then had a certain degree of immediacy for Furner beyond its larger implications for imperial politics and the Counter-Reformation. So, the bulk of his treatise is devoted to a catalog and explication of miracles associated with shrines to the Virgin within the Diocese of Bamberg, in particular the chapel at Marienweiher. The book one provides a general introduction, including a history of the connection between heresy and rebellion, focusing on let's not forget this, the efficacy of Catholic miracles against the false miracles of the heretic, which are ultimately diabolical in origin. So yeah, like he really goes hard on like this is what the Catholic Church had to offer in the 1600s was like, we do miracles and they're real and they're from God. These clowns out here are just like playing around with the devil and like demons and shit, and like there were, Marian apparitions and like a man who was blind, like the bishop blessed him and then he could see again. Like that shit was like, that was happening, whether or not it was like really happening, but like those were types of events that, people believed in. Like the church has a special, like spiritual, almost like this like white magic, like power that its sanctioned officials, the bishop, priest, whatever, like have that, can't be replaced by anything else because their lineage goes back to the apostles with Jesus.
Exactly. And it was founded on those, like the miracles of Jesus, and it was founded by Jesus. That's like, the whole thing. Their idea.
Yeah. So he starts talking about Ferdinand II. He calls on Ferdinand to be like David rather than Saul. He should be pious, humble, and always zealous. Blah, blah, blah. So then, he says the reign of Rudolf II had been a time when commandments had been forgotten. His was the stubborn and rebellious generation, which was not steadfast in devotion to the divine cult. On account of the impiety of Ferdinand's predecessors, the empire was facing its most supreme test. The source of the current threat was the, quote, monstrous Calvinist heresy that had afflicted all of Europe with the spirit of rebellion. Catholic rulers in England and the Netherlands, as well as parts of Germany, had succumbed to the power of international Calvinism. It's funny to like read about it in this like Red Scare kind of way. Like international Calvinism's everywhere.
Yeah.
On the other side stood the Orthodox monarchs, Philip IV of Spain, Louis XIII of France, Maximilian of Bavaria, and somewhat incongruously, the Lutheran elector John George of Saxony. Behind these noble rulers stood the Catholic princes of Germany, Italy, and the Netherlands. But the Catholic alliance had a further invaluable ally. The Blessed Virgin Mary, Queen of Heaven, was the sworn enemy of the pestiferous dragon of Calvinism and guaranteed victory to her devotees. Let's go. All right. We're Mary worshiping here. Okay. Furner provides a series of examples illustrating how, in the past, princes had triumphed over their foes in the moment of their greatest peril through the aid of the Blessed Virgin. So they have their own lady, This is the original lady.
They do. Yeah, Our Lady. That's what.
Our Lady. Saying, The first was Narcissus in his victory in Totila and the Goths. Thereafter, a series of Catholic emperors, Heraclius, John I, Timices, and John II, Comnenus, I don't know, okay, had triumphed over barbarian hordes. Furner notes here the similarities between the fury of the, quote, barbarous Calvinists, Bohemians, and Hungarians, and that of the Goths, Russians, Bulgars, and Patsanaks. I don't even know who they are. The comparison is telling, as it adds an ethnic dimension to the conflict between the German Catholics and the Scythian Calvinists. That's his quote. Of course, the current war was somewhat different from those in the past. The emperor was not struggling against barbarians or Turks, but against his subjects, ones who, even as they call themselves reformed, are Christians. But the revolt of the Calvinists, as a rebellion of heretics against their sovereign, is more serious. Furner compares Calvinism to the Albigensian heresy. All corners of Europe were once infected with the, quote, pestilential stench, the cancer of Catharism. Ferdinand was now faced with a similar challenge from the Calvinists. Who had afflicted the most flourishing kingdom of Bohemia and stirred up discord in that blessed land? The Calvinists. Who had stolen crowns from the heads of kings, committed sacrilege, and wrought violence on Europe? The Calvinists. Who had tried to rip the imperial scepter from the hands of the emperor himself? The Calvinists. Ultimately, the Calvinists must be adjudged the worst violators of peace, workers of sacrilege, the parents of all ills that now afflicted the world. Against the, quote, feces of Calvinism, Ferner would demonstrate the miraculous powers of the Catholic faith. In the process, he intended to explode the pseudo-miracles of that hated and ludicrous sect, those, quote, who call themselves brothers of the Rosy Cross. No, he's going at them. Yeah, so, it says his argument in the early pages represents one side in the debate among Catholic theologians over the meaning and direction of the war. On the political side, there was a debate among Spanish and Bavarian parties at the imperial court. While Spanish policy ultimately viewed the re-Catholicization of Europe as the goal, the king and his officials knew there was no chance of carrying out their mission under the current circumstances. Their goals in the short term were more limited. Philip III wished to see Ferdinand deal with the revolt quickly and then make peace with Germany so he could support his Spanish cousins in quelling the Dutch rebellion. This would involve defending the Spanish road and possibly intervention against the French along the southwestern frontiers of the empire. Maximilian of Bavaria, on the other hand, wished to see a continuation of the war against the Protestants in Germany and opposed involvement in the Netherlands or any actions that might bring France into the conflict. From a religious perspective, the question was between pursuing a policy of moderation or assuming a more aggressive posture towards the Protestants. Martin Becon, the imperial confessor, was one of the primary spokesmen for the moderates. His argument was that to extend the war any further would imperil both the lives of Ferdinand's subjects and the gains Catholics had made up to this point. The militants, on the other hand, saw the Bohemian Rebellion as a holy war. This view was first championed by Muzio Vitelleschi, superior general of the Jesuit order, then later by the Jesuit theologians Adam Consen and William Lamormani. The accession of Pope Gregory XV in February 1621 gave even greater prestige to this viewpoint. From Gregory's perspective, this was not simply a holy war, it was a providential war. Ultimately, the victories won by the Catholics over the Protestants were signs of divine providence, and in that sense, a form of divine revelation. To ignore the signs of victory would be to deny one's trust in God and his mercy. As Vitelleschi wrote to Beacon after White Mountain, the Battle of White Mountain, the enemy would be overcome, quote, not by human counsels and strength, but by miracles and prodigies. Interesting. So they thought, the miracles are very important. But then it takes over 400 pages for him to return to the Rosicrucian menace. The intervening sections of the book explore the origins and nature of miracles, as well as the false claims of the heretics. Ferner begins by noting how historically heretics have denied the efficacy of miracles. Wycliffe had called them deceptions of the devil, a sentiment repeated by Hus, Luther, and most recently, Calvin. Protestants slandered the Catholic Church by claiming that their supposed miracles had either natural causes or were akin to demonic magic. Such calumnies were common among, quote, Mohammedans and heretics. Wow. In truth, the Church had been founded on miracles. The miracles of Christ were essential, right, for the establishment of the Church. Christ granted his apostles the, quote, power of thaumaturgy to assist them in the work of extending the Church to all nations, et cetera, et cetera. So how could, with the miracles of the Old and New Testament in view, how can the modern reformers, Hus, Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, Beza, and the like, call these the work of demons? How can they impugn the power of the Church to work miracles as demonic acts, the works of Antichrist, when Christ himself and his apostles had worked miracles, and blah, blah, blah. So this was his argument at this stage focuses primarily on the denial of miracles by Calvinists, in particular French Huguenots, suggesting a connection between the rejection of Catholic thaumaturgy and rebellion. Right? So the debate over miracles thus appears intimately connected to the problem of religious civil war. This connection becomes ever clearer as Ferner begins to distinguish between two types of heresy. The first are those which deny the efficacy of miracles. Hussites, Lutherans, Calvinists are in this category. The other are those who actually perform false miracles or wonders, either through fraud or with the assistance of demons. He says the Arian bishop Sorolla staged a miraculous cure of a blind beggar. His attempt failed, apparently, and the man who claimed to be blinded was struck blind for his impiety.
Yeah.
Wow. Unclear if they did that or if God.
No, he was struck blind by God.
Okay.
For trying to, pull a fake miracle.
Yeah, but then only the intercession of a Catholic bishop was able to restore the man's sight, demonstrating the truth of the Catholic faith. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then they do tell stories like this. Like he talks about Cathar priests walking across the surface of a river. The people were amazed, and some of them came on the river and stood with the Cathars on the surface of the water. But this was no miracle. It was an illusion created with the help of demons. This fact was revealed when a Catholic priest, through the invocation of the divine name, and with a display of the consecrated host and the sign of the cross, caused the Cathars and their converts to fall into the river whence they were swept away. That's funny. He just kills them by overruling their demonic trick. And then, he talks about the Albigensians. They stand in a line of heresies that began with Simon Magus. The pseudo-prophecies of Lutherans and Calvinists constitute illicit attempts to divine the future with the aid of demons. No, bad. The demonic nature of Protestantism figures in Ferner's analysis of miracles involving the Catholic wives of Huguenot nobles, cases either of demonic possession or the saving of dying children through the sacrament of baptism. Interesting. Yeah, so he says that Calvinism is the source of disorder, civil war, and death. The, quote, children condemned to death and damnation by cruel Calvinist fathers and saved by loving Catholic mothers stand for the people of Europe who the Holy Mother Church seeks to save from the Calvinist faction. The miracle stories thus take on a political and prophetic aspect in Ferner's retelling. They presage the miraculous deliverance of the world from the ludibrium of Calvinism by Catholic
the
arms.
play, the joke,
Wow. Wow. And then, he goes off on the Anabaptists. I don't know if we talked about them before, but...
Right, he draws, a lot of parallels between them. It's actually,
Pizzagate-ish a little bit. He says they consort with demons. In their nocturnal convecticles, they engage in the most despicable forms of vice. Once the lights are extinguished, each couples with the closest person, regardless of age, sex, or affinity. All this is done supposedly in fulfillment of the biblical injunction to be fruitful and multiply, but is in truth an occasion for, quote, inordinate cardinal lust, adultery, incest, and sodomy. On account of such blasphemy, Anabaptists should be eradicated, quote, with fire and sword.
This is so this is when he gets to the Rosicrucians. He says, at this point, Farner begins his description of the latest form of this sort of vomit and apostasy, the grandiloquently titled Fraternity of the Rosy Cross. And the several little books that have circulated in Germany. I love how the relish with which this author, I think is it William Bradford Smith who wrote this? Am I right? Yeah.
It is.
He really relishes, I gotta say, it is fun, to just describe these really these big invectives by these guys. Totally. In the several little books that had circulated in Germany, the members of this ridiculous, vain, inane, and brutish order had proclaimed a 4-part program. They were a congregation of the elect, called together by God to bring about a reformation of the church, a restoration of the lapsed civil order, and a purification of science and medicine. They would also demonstrate how through natural scientific methods, lead, copper, and other base metals could be transformed into gold. Ferner makes light of these claims. Following Jacob Gerster's earlier critique of the Rosicrucians, he insists that their claims are nothing short of blasphemy. They claim to possess powers that rightfully belong to Jesus Christ, Savior of the world, the true restorer and reformer. The universal reformation is nothing but an obscene fable. It is merely a rarefied version of the teachings of Thomas Müntzer, that disciple of Luther, who called upon the lower orders to rebel against their superiors, leading to the Peasants' War of 1525. The Rosicrucian claim that they have been deputized by God to repair the Republicam Christianam represents the genuine voice of the Anabaptists of Münster. There can be no doubt the Rosicrucians represent yet one more lethal and poisonous heresy, intending to stir up subjects into a state of rebellion. This is a good part. So the Ferner subsequently criticizes the Rosicrucian pretense of having reformed medicine. Their claims to heal various diseases involves a rejection of the authority of the most ancient and respected medical authorities, in particular Galen and Aristotle, as we were saying before. Their arrogance in the face of authority points again to their kinship to the Anabaptists, who pretend to great moral virtue, but in truth are guilty of the most vicious carnality and lasciviousness. Both claim to speak to angels, but possess all the impurities of Asmodeus, the one whom they worship in their libidinous nocturnal conventicles.
No.
Further notes how many German princes have been seduced by the Rosicrucian alchemists and conjurers and have even advanced them in their courts. Through promises of earthly wealth, the Rosicrucians had placed themselves in a position to defraud not only princes but all of Germany by manipulating the value of coins through their alchemical illusions.
Wow, they predicted meme coins and like crypto.
Well, I mean, yeah, but also like, and also just like it kind of does have like a Templar link with like their sort of the innovation of banking being connected with like the Knights Hospitalier and all this stuff. But I mean, it is true. Like this, like they do kind of offer like in the manifestos, like, we offer our gold and all our treasures to like the Romish Empire and stuff. So it's kind of, it's an interesting concern. That you can kind of even link it to this whole thing, like like Marx says in Capital, where it's like the overturning of these like superstitions about the value of gold and things like that. That it leads to kind of the modern like capitalist social formation or whatever.
Right.
But yeah, so then he critiques like their miraculous activities. Weighing the writings of the Rosicrucians against the authority of Scripture and the Fathers, particularly Augustine, Ferner argues that one can only conclude their power comes from demons. They constitute the apotheosis of heresy. This is for you, the guy in the chat who asked at the beginning of the stream, what's so mysterious about Satanism? It's pretty straightforward. Well, shout out to you. Yeah. This goes out to you. They constitute the apotheosis of heresy, the perfect combination of demonic magic and political sedition. Despite the fancy pseudoscientific language and moralizing tone of their tracts, they are no different from the Munster Anabaptists and the Thuringian Confederates of Thomas Munster. Their works are false, all false, illusions conjured by demons, inane and vain, and certainly contaminated with heretical impurities. Then he continues to go on these rants, but yeah. He says they're not worried of serious thought. They're not driven by a spirit of sober constantia, but by wild satanic insanity. Such doctrines are not worthy of serious contemplation. One should flee from them. So too the teachings of the Rosicrucians. To what end, Ferner asked, should one study their magic? One rejoices at chasing mice out of his house and moles out of his fields, but people are still drawn to magical inanities. What profit is there in their morbid curatives mixed with diabolical superstition? The Rosicrucian quote-unquote science is a hodgepodge of planetary signs, constellation figures, concentric and eccentric circles, various sects, morbid incantations and exorcisms, providential numbers, sophomoric pranks, and hot air. Is kind of spinning anyway. Got him.
Yeah, I at the end, it's worth reading here. Both promise in the titles of their books universal reformation, which seems to extend to not only the earth but the celestial spheres. But their miracles are false and are only possible through submission to evil demons. They are the classic example of demons appearing as angels of light. But once the confused nonsense of their mystical doctrines are stripped away, one is left face to face with the devil. There you go.
Yeah. And so, this is a good part too. The Rosicrucians then are one more demented magical sect ejected from the same sewer that produced the Albigensians and the Anabaptists. Indeed, the Rosicrucian movement is merely a development and progression of Menonism mixed with magic. To emphasize the comparison, Forner recounts in the full Surius' account of the Anabaptist tyranny in Munster. Surius showed how the Anabaptists gradually infiltrated the city. While there was no doubt that their ideas represented an extension of Lutheranism, the Lutheran residents of the city, no less than the Catholics, were forced to take flight or submit to their tyranny. They sought to set up a king of Israel on their own making, throwing over all order. Their king and queen represented all carnality and debauchery. They maintained their power through demonic illusions and prodigies. Hence, a regime that was supposed to have been founded on the gospel turned into one approaching those of the Goths, the Cimbri, and the Vandals in its impiety and barbarism. Interesting, going out to the Vandals there, but yeah. So, Yeah, he talks about how the Lutheran fascination with the forbidden arts of necromancy, oracles, and divination opened them up to demonic influence. It is certain the successes of Lutheran prophecy were brought about through cooperation with demons. The comical King and Queen of Munster seem in this presentation of Sirius's narrative parallel to the Winter King and Queen of Bohemia. Right, so he's talking about Queen Elizabeth and her husband, but also you can draw a parallel with like the King and Queen that we see in the Chemical Wedding too. Like they also kind of had this sort of like, it is interesting. They're almost just like sort of a, topsy-turvy king and queen in a way. Right. And this sort of suspension of all reason with these kind of like alchemical beheadings and things like that,
Yeah, no, true. And that Amazon infected with all
Queen
sorts
Elizabeth.
of Calvinist perversion.
Yeah.
He says of Queen Elizabeth. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So he goes, presumably once the Rosicrucians had weakened both Catholic and Lutheran states sufficiently and initiated the current war, there was no need for them anymore. If Foreigner and other Catholic authors have little to say about the Rosicrucians after 1621, with Battle at White Mountain and basically like the defeat of Elizabeth and, this whole, rebellion, it is not because they were suppressed, as Yeats argued, but because they had indeed vanished. They had succeeded in their goal. In the weeks before White Mountain, Foreigner could see the chaos they had wrought. His counsel that Ferdinand place himself in God's hand reflected the mood of the moment, when it appeared that the Calvinists, through the machinations of their Rosicrucian allies, had triumphed. Yeah. So, wow. I guess that's sort of the motive for his writing, right? So, yeah, and then he talks about how he comes close to to articulating Yeats's central argument. That Rosicrucianism was a means of cementing the diplomatic alliance necessary to secure the victory of the Elector Palatine, the long-anticipated struggle between the Habsburgs and the Protestant princes, etc. Yeah. I'm going to my notes here to see if there's anything else about this one.
It goes into like Boucher's argument, the other guy who attacks from a different set of sources. Boucher says Boucher's also a little bit of like a reformist within the Catholic Church, but he says Calvinists, like other sorcerers, view religion as a means to worldly ends. They are both atheists, rejecting the sacraments and placing the dragon, Satan himself, at the center of their devotions. Such atheism has been revealed time and again in the string of heresies that have threatened the Church since the days of Simon Magus. Calvinists practice absurd and farcical, quote, mysteries, not unlike those of the followers of Mithras. The false demonic rituals conducted in Calvinist, quote, synagogues may be traced to Innes and Mambrus, and all the magicians descended from Ham. Wow.
Yeah.
Damn. That's crazy.
It's he does this a lot. Like it's he says that the Rosicrucian sodality is revealed in their own account of the cave of Christian Rosencreutz. The cave recalls the oracles of the Greeks as well as the mysteries of Ceres and Bacchus. It is well known the oracles passed down to the ancients were given by the devil. Nevertheless, princes, kings, and emperors have been seduced by the false miracles and predictions of these professors of enchantment. He says the rise of, this is Bucher's claim, the rise of the Rosicrucians is closely connected with the growing plague of witchcraft in France and Germany. Bucher points to the defeat of the royalist forces at the Battle of Coutras in 1587. The Duke of Guise was faced with a band of German mercenaries recruited to aid the Huguenots. Was it in any accident that witchcraft was discovered in precisely those parts of Germany where the Huguenots recruited their troops? The German mercenaries were clearly familiars of demons and spread their contagion into France. The result of the Huguenot victory had been the imposition of government by sorcery. The rise of the Rosicrucian movement in Germany points back to the Luthero-Calvinism of England. This is very Francis Yates. There you go. Wow. The Rosicrucian manifestos themselves are entirely in concord with the Calvinist doctrines founded in the Seance of the Synod of Dort. Boucher implies that the later was itself a Rosicrucian conclave. Rosicrucianism is also connected with the spread of witchcraft in France. Yeah. He quotes Pierre de Lancre's account of witchcraft in Bordeaux to the effect that many Englishmen, Scots, and other travelers coming in search of wine to the city of Bordeaux have assured us during their travels they have observed large hordes of demons in frightening human shapes passing through France. All right.
Wow. Wow. That's he blames it on Henry IV. and his soi-disant Catholics.
Exactly, yeah.
Who have betrayed and let the Luthero-Calvinist schism spread. Yeah. So, yeah, it is interesting. I mean, I think you can't quite, I don't think the evidence is there to make like a vast argument about Rosicrucians somehow like stoking the 30 Years' War or something like that.
No,
but like they're
it's
part
just
of
like
the larger tapestry
these people
of it.
perceived it to be true. Like, yeah.
Right. And then I guess at the conclusion of the war, they never really reemerge again.
The big thing that you can like, well, insofar as they emerged to begin with,
I guess
but
they
like
released 3 things. That's it.
Yeah, but and they were just like publications. Like it's not like these. But I mean, what does continue to exist like is the and which I think is like the big takeaway from the biggest thing you can take away from these is that like their perception that like the nobles, the aristocracy were like deeply involved like in the occult, and like that this like movement appealed primarily to them and that they were being like seduced by it. That I think is like substantially true.
Yes.
And that like this
something that was
type
aimed
of
at the elite,
like science or ideas like did have like favor.
Right. And though like it's like not literally accurate that all these people secretly became Rosicrucians, but like this, I feel like they were fascinated by ideas that were similar and like adjacent to it, and maybe some of the ideas.
This is
themselves.
Yeah,
and I mean that like this type of thinking that is exemplified in like the Rosicrucian manifestos, it's like typical of an era and of the types of I don't know if you call them sorcerers or alchemists that surrounded like that were walking in the halls of power advising monarchs and rulers and shit.
Right. This is like a good like summary of like the takeaway from these two things, like from that same article. What we find in these two texts is not so much a conflict between the idea of monarchy and popular heresy, but between two rival conceptions of popular sovereignty. The precise form of the opposition, moreover, is determined by the conception of sovereignty as it was understood at the beginning of the 17th century. The two factors had fundamentally altered the way in which people had come to view the state and society. The coupling of political and religious reform, begun in the 14th century and continued through the consular epoch, gained greater urgency in the years after the Protestant Reformation. In the confessional era, the state came increasingly to be defined according to the religious beliefs of the prince. Consequently, the sacral character of sovereignty was intensified, right? Especially as religious controversy boiled over into religious war. Within the culture of late humanism, sovereignty came to be conceived in occult terms. Thaumaturgic sovereignty was the ideal to which practically all rulers of the late Renaissance subscribed. So that I think is an important thing.
Their ability to affect miracles.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, this is a little bit, quote from R.J.W. Evans. No matter how radical or paraphrase him, no matter how radical or countercultural the ideas of natural philosophers of the Rosicrucian sort may appear, their intellectual world was deeply conservative and conventional. Although the instruments might be new, the tunes were old. This is kind of looping back to around what you were talking about before.
Right.
And while occultism was potentially dangerous, within the culture of imperial and noble courts, it remained within carefully circumscribed bounds. The distinction between aristocratic, learned occultism and base, common witchcraft was clearly established, right? Which is interesting because, like, it's kind of, but anyway.
It's like I was saying, like, the old lady gets, like, burned at the stake.
Exactly,
or for being a witch, but, like, the court alchemist, like, as long as he's, like, plays by the rules and doesn't, like, draw too much attention to himself, he's fine.
I want to go back to that book, like, because we didn't like really get to do like a full like exploration of it in the Salem episode. Like, we bit off a little bit more than we can chew. Like, we talked about it a little bit, but like, it's about like that medieval Irish witch trial, and it talks about like the kind of shift that starts to happen from like the idea of like what a necromancer was being like a man who was like powerful elite, to like an old woman, you know, like but anyway.
Even in
so
the Bible, like pharaohs, like sorcerers, are like men. You know what I mean? Like,
I guess you have the Witch of Endor. That's
really?
yeah. But other than that, yeah, definitely you have the magicians of Pharaoh. And yeah, I mean, Moses is kind of like a good, like he's like a thaumaturgist kind of, you know. So
he has a staff. He can do white magic.
Yeah, basically he's like the, you know, the ultimate magician. He beats the magicians at their own game. But on a political front, the yearnings for universal empire were essentially medieval in character. In any event, as creatures of the court, the chemists and astrologers to whom the Rosicrucian manifestos were addressed were hardly the sort of men to engage in popular rebellion. What Bruce Janicek said of English alchemists of the era is equally true of their German colleagues. These were men who believed that through their arts, they could contribute to strengthening the state and shore up traditional institutions that have been battered for decades. Yeah, so this is a good conclusion here. Perhaps the reason for Ferner and Bucher's vehemence is not so much their fear of the occult, which was real enough, as their concern about Renaissance monarchy. Neither Ferner nor Bucher were convinced that the crown could be trusted to pursue the correct path on its own. Their general discomfiture with the excesses of Renaissance occultism reveals them as exemplars of what Hugh Trevor Roper described as the Puritanism of the right, capital R. Both present as their ideal, both present as their ideal, a mixed monarchy wherein policy was framed by the clergy in consultation with the ruling estates of the realm. The only alternative to such a system was the either tyranny of sorcerer kings or the horror of Munster and peasant rebellion. For both authors, the policy around which the realm could be united was the same. Providential war against the enemies of the faith, either the Calvinists or, in the more grandiose fantasies of Bucher, the Turk. Both saw in the outbreak of the 30 Years' War the same opportunity, the chance to complete the work of religious reform that had begun 2 centuries earlier but had been commandeered by the heretics. The false universal reformation of the Rosicrucians revealed the opportunity for a genuine, godly, and orthodox reform of the church and of society in general. In that regard, their ultimate goals were little different from those articulated by the fictional Christian Rosenkreuz and the all-too-real Thomas Müntzer. Pretty good.
Yeah. Yeah, good article. Yeah. Now, is there anything we want to say real quick about Francis Bacon and like how heavily he was influenced by the...
Well, one thing, like I guess I could talk about this. We could talk about this briefly, but like one thing that like, you know, we kind of talked about a little bit before in our episode about Atlantis that we did. His work, The New Atlantis, that he wrote, is basically like very similar to like Andreai's like Christianopolis, or like the sort of ideas, like, you know, the sort of idea of like political organization that you see in the Rosicrucian manifestos. Let me see if I can find it. Like Bacon, Atlantis. He talks about how, like, you know, they speak like certain languages. They speak ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, scholastic Latin, and interestingly, they speak Spanish in his sort of New Atlantis, right? Which is in this place called Ben Salem, which is like kind of a ruled by like an enlightened elite.
Jimmy vindicated.
Well, yeah, there you go. But also like it shows Spanish. Like how the how central like the Spanish like colonization and domination of the New World was to the imagination of these people, because Spain also features in the manifesto, and it just continually comes up. So he describes the sort of, it is very similar to Christianopolis in a way, because you get like this kind of ideal like educational system that he describes. And he was like very like clearly influenced by them. It's kind of like he replaces like Damsar with Ben Salem, but it's the same kind of idea, and he like kind of forwards like the Baconian method as being the way to like transform and revive the sciences.
Now, were you able to find anything in anything you read? Because I didn't necessarily see anything like, I don't know, confirming of this, but in terms of a connection between like this sort of Rosicrucian trend or like complex of ideas and the earliest like formations of like European Freemasonry?
They talk about that like a little bit, like, or different people talk about that like a little bit later on. Some like critique it, but I think that like there's this might be something to get into later, because like there were like Rosicrucian orders that were formed later on,
Right.
and yeah, it's interesting that some actually like kind of suggest that the influence on Masonry wasn't as significant as some make it out to be. But there's this book like the Rosicrucian Enlightenment Revisited that talks about this a little bit. It's not the same as Yeats' book, the Rosicrucian Enlightenment, but it's kind of like a later response to Yeats and kind of building on her work, but they'll also take into account like the critiques of it. Let me see if I can find the relevant part about Freemasonry. Yeah. So he does talk about, Jan Amos Komensky, better known in the West as Comenius, born in Bohemia 400 years ago, studied in Germany at the universities of Herborn and Heidelberg, lived in Poland, England, and Sweden, died at 78 years of age in Amsterdam. Through his visit to England in 1641, Comenius almost certainly influenced the founders of the Royal Society, and some scholars have claimed he acted as a link between Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. The reputation of Comenius in Czech lands, Poland, Sweden, and the Netherlands, where he made his home until his death, still stands high. He lived and taught until defeat by the imperial forces at the Battle of the White Mountain drove him into hiding. At Fulneck, that's where he lived. So
one potential link with the Royal Society. I just, I always just kind of thought about them as like serious scientists, or whatever. But, I mean, some allege that they sort of like this court of like magicians just like kind of secularized themselves a little bit and then became like the Society of Scientists that we still have today, right?
Yeah, this book, like, definitely like draws like a very like like firm connection between Rosicrucianism and Freemasonry. It is a little bit like it's one source. It's like older. I know there are some who like dispute the connection being as strong as like he makes it out to be, but I need to like look into it a bit more. But I feel like it is there. And if you like some of the early, it's interesting, like the early like Rosy Cross orders that were formed like later on in like the 18th century. There's another book that like looks into one of these in particular that we didn't get to talk about, but might be good to talk about like in a later episode in some connection, which is the Rose Cross and the Age of Reason. But like, it talks about how this was kind of like, it's kind of thought of as being like a kind of counter Enlightenment organization, but it also had like the sort of the argument of the book is that it wasn't really entirely opposed to like the ideas of the Enlightenment. But I don't know, it's kind of a red flag to me whenever like someone talks about like the Enlightenment, like capital E, because I feel like it's kind of like a dated paradigm.
Several centuries of like, and also like it came along with so much dark baggage in the form of like slavery, colonialism, genocide.
Well, yeah,
but like the Enlightenment is like
well, even like, that aside, it's kind of like it's almost like it almost has the same effect as talking about like the Rosicrucians, where it creates a sense of like a movement out of something that was more like adequately described as like maybe like a matrix of ideas.
A tendency that emerged for a while that in retrospect you can kind of slap a label on it, but it was more dispersed and not as like it's like it's like maybe the last thing we should do for the Rosicrucians is like call them the Rosicrucians, because that it seems like that was like their intent was to get us to call them the Rosicrucians when there is Rosicrucianism because they invented it, at least maybe these two guys did. But in terms of like an order of the Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross, like by all historical evidence, like really doesn't seem to have existed. But then people would take it over a century later and like actually make Brotherhood of the Rosy Cross orders that did have people in it, you know?
Exactly. Yeah.
So
it was in the same way that like these like sort of like they call them like philosophical novels, like the New Atlantis or New Atlantis of Bacon, or Christianopolis by Andrei himself. It was like a program or an idea to explore like a concept, but you know, it was actually kind of like injecting itself into the political domain. I'm trying to think of like what I mean. QAnon is one modern day parallel. I mean,
Siege, the Nazi book. I that's example of that.
That's not like a bad. It's not a bad parallel in some ways.
Like
like
future
because
fan fiction about like a lone wolf, like commando Nazi guy.
Yeah, but it also like doesn't quite like tread the line between fact and fiction in the same way. Like because like that book gets really like into, or the Turner Diaries.
The Turner Diaries. Yeah. Oh yeah, I guess the Turner Diaries would be the like that. That's actually they're both kind of about that. I guess they both kind of take place in the future during like a period of like race war or something like that.
You could compare it to Michelle Remembers. Michelle Remembers is like a dark mirror of this, in that like it is about like a sort of secret like satanic order that like exists everywhere in the United States, but is like and it purports to be true, but is based on like memories that are like produced under hypnosis. That have like no like actual substantive basis that like anyone can point to, and but instead of like trying to organize something, I mean, in a way, well, you'd have to go back earlier than that.
A Course in Miracles pops to mind as something that is like purports to be channeled and true, and people follow it, but obviously.
But also,
maybe
like, there actually
different.
Was a Course in Miracles, and like they kind of like marketed that and everything. Whereas, what is something that someone just like puts out in the world and is like, "There's this awesome group, like you might want to join." Like we're.
I mean, a lot
like,
of proto Q stuff, like the idea of like white hats and like Project Camelot.
Q is very like this,
Like there were predecessors to Q